well, you're in for a treat again, because today we have Joan Carter, and she is the co-founder of Carter Enterprise Group with her husband, Stephen. And Joan has been a senior organizational consultant with nearly 35 years of corporate consulting and entrepreneurial experience. She's achieved an impressive reputation as an internationally recognized leader in organizational consulting. Her background couples operations experience as an executive officer with extensive consulting experience in board development, assessment, and development of executives, teams, and organizations. She's the former president of the Heartland region of Right Management Consultants. She's a member of the National Association of Corporate Directors and founded their Kansas City chapter. She's authored many articles on consulting. Again, you were talking about that. How do they get it all done? I don't know how the people you guys get to see and hear from today get it all done. And these two are probably at the top of the list of busy executives who are caring about the community. Her articles on consulting include board succession planning, strategy development, leadership effectiveness, and organizational change. And she's been a keynote speaker on global workforce effectiveness, culture change, and leadership. Her expertise is extensive. Much of it has to do with effective management, effective organizational structures. So when they share with you on board effectiveness today, they've shared at Pathways for Change. They're actually teaching a course at what's their new name now?
Northwest Florida
College. Northwest Florida State College. Used to be the Okaloosa Walton campus out there. You know, we changed JC to PSC, so Northwest Florida State College. They're teaching board effectiveness training at the Costa Institute, right?
Yes.
In collaboration with them. She serves as an advisor to board CEOs, senior leaders, and emerging leaders of organizations from Fortune 50s to family-owned businesses. I think that should be Fortune 500s, or is it Fortune 50s?
Fortune 50s.
Oh, so the top 50.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. That one's out of my league, Joan. Stephen has over 35 years' experience as a corporate executive, an entrepreneur, and a consultant. He acquired Right Management Consultants Heartland Region after a 20-year career at Hallmark Cards Incorporated. At Right, Stephen consulted with senior executives on talent management, leadership development, and business strategy. He sold Right Management Consultants Heartland in 2006 because you're retiring, right? I mean, yeah, you're not supposed to be doing this much work anymore.
Actually, it was a good offer.
It was a good offer. While at Hallmark, he developed expertise in strategic planning, organizational design, succession planning, and leadership development. You're seeing the trend of why they're up here today, right? He acquired Right Management Consultants Heartland Region in 1990. Now here's the impressive thing and why I pay very close attention to what they say. It had 3 team members when he started and over 100 when it was acquired or sold for that very good offer. A lot of that has to do with their organizational effectiveness and training and development of processes and systems and team members. Additionally, you may have heard of this one. He acquired Quantum Workplace Incorporated in 2002, a technology-based company specializing in workplace analytics and survey research. They're internationally known for their best places to work surveys. Y'all have heard of those, right? He co-founded the Prospect Group, Inc., an investment bank specializing in internet mergers in 1996. And he closed on 39 acquisitions with that group in 3 years. Successful acquisitions. He has been the vice chairman of the Greater Kansas City Community Foundation, the billion dollar foundation, has worked to improve the quality of life in the Heartland region. He's a member of U.S. Bank Kansas City Region Board of Directors, past chairman of the board, and national liaison of Junior Achievement of Middle America. Is Jay here today? I think they were here in January. Stephen is the past president of Angel Flight Central. One of the reasons I got to talk to him when I was at Ronald McDonald House many moons ago. He has a bachelor's degree in business administration from Nichols College, served as a captain in the U.S. Army, and was awarded the Bronze Star and several Vietnam campaign medals. So it is my great honor to introduce you to Stephen and Joan Carter.
Thank you, Andrea. And Joan and I are really delighted to be here today. How many of you have heard us speak before?
Whoops.
Oh, this is really scary.
New stories, Stephen, new stories.
That means I have to create new stories. And so if I repeat a story, just say, hey, Carter, I've heard that one before. And because that's my expertise is stories. And we'll start right off. And by the way, there's a housekeeping thing on breaks. Those of you that have heard us before, no, we don't take breaks. If you need to take a break, just quietly get up and go to the restrooms. But we're going to keep on going. The reason for that is it's hard to take a 5-minute break in 5 minutes. Just doesn't work. It turns out to be a half hour. So just if you need a break, just go over to the restrooms. And if you need more food, there's more back there. It looks like Andrea's provided really well. Risky for us in that, holy smokes, we're not only the after lunch speakers, but we're the during lunch speakers, and so that's really scary. But nevertheless, we're going to march on through. Okay, this choice, not chance, determines destiny. And we've used this, and you may have heard us talk about it before because we really believe in it. It means that you have to have planning to what you do. And everything you do, if you don't plan, you're going to end up somewhere else. And so it's really important to plan and determine your own destiny through a well thought out plan. Joan?
Okay, we really want to talk a little bit about what is really important in terms of boards. What is their authority? What is the role and the responsibility? And it's really 3 large buckets. Number 1 is they set the direction. And what I mean by direction is vision, mission, strategic plan, and execution plan. They also help establish the values of that organization. And they give the authority to the staff to execute on parts of that plan. The board owns part of the plan, the staff owns part of the plan. Number 2 big bucket of responsibilities. They make sure that the resources are available that are needed by that nonprofit to fulfill their mission. And resources, certainly financial. Yes, that does mean that boards should get involved in fundraising and making sure that financially they have the funds to I almost knocked him out. The funds in order to fulfill their mission. They also should make sure that the board members have the financial acumen to understand where that nonprofit is financially. Also, in terms of resources, leadership. Does the organization have the leadership both at the board level and the staff level to fulfill their mission? And the 3rd large bucket of responsibilities is oversight. First, financial oversight, making sure that the right financial policies are in place, that there's transparency with those financials, that the financials are accurate, that the 990s are done well, but also looking at internal control audits and risk management. So making sure that all of that's in place. Part of oversight is making sure that that nonprofit or that organization is following the laws and the ethical standards needed. And the 3rd area in terms of that oversight is it is their job to see if the nonprofit is making progress against their strategic plan. So there should be annual goals. Those goals should have measures. When the board comes together, they're looking at how are we doing against those measures. Are we on track or off track? So 3 major areas again. Number 1, the board sets direction. And sets direction. They're not involved in the operations. They set directions. Number 2, they make sure that that nonprofit has the resources necessary to fulfill their mission. And number 3, they're responsible for oversight of that nonprofit. Are you keeping up with me?
No, I actually was not keeping up with you. You went way ahead of me. That's not something new. It happens fairly often. Okay. Hey, this is the building cycle of building a board. How many of you have boards? And let me just guess, it's really easy to find board members? And they're really competent people? They attend more than 75% of the meetings. How many has a board that attends more than 75% of the meetings?
Good.
Oh, the number of hands went a lot fewer. And you know, it's so important. One of the real dangers of building a board is not having the right people there. So often, and Joan and I have been on a gazillion boards, and too many for us to even count. But if you don't have the right people there, they aren't going to provide very much good wisdom and good guidance to the organization. And it's so important to think in terms of each board member and succession of each board member. You really want to select people based on the knowledge and the skills they bring to the party. That does not mean that if you have an attorney there, that attorney or an accountant is going to provide services for you free. That just doesn't happen. But what it does mean is that attorney can say, wait a minute, that doesn't sound right to me. And so you you should all have a corporate attorney, and you should then take that yellow flag that attorney gives you and follow it up and pay for those services. So getting a person on the board with credentials does not mean they're going to provide things for you free. It's really important to get the right candidates for the board that fit with the culture. Your board members can give you successes. They can give you new blood. They should be looking forward to that. They should be finding new prospective board members. And the most important thing in a board for the new person that starts on that board is an orientation. Make sure they understand the whole mission of the agency, and they should walk away with a passion. Have an orientation where the board member actually is passionate about the cause, passionate about what the business is, and so it's critically important that you have a successful orientation. In addition, you need to provide information covering the mission. That's in the board orientation. Evaluate the board. You know, it's so important to do a self-evaluation. And it should be done on an annual basis. And let's evaluate how successful we've been as a board. Look at the various things that you're looking for the board to give to you, and then do an evaluation. If they come out all 10s, and 10 is the highest, you have to kind of wonder, are they really looking realistically? I did an interview with a board member, and that board member, I said, hey, I'm doing an interview, and this is part of strategic planning, and so he said, oh, I'm happy to talk to you. But first of all, I have to tell you, I'm not very involved. And I try to make some of the meetings, but you know, I just am not very involved. I'm not sure what they're doing. I'm thinking, what a successful board member or engagement that is. There's a person that's not engaged to the organization, and if it's filling a resume spot for them, fine, but it's really terrible for the agency. When I was at Hallmark and I moved into Kansas City, all the officers were expected, now it was required, that you were on a board. And so I was assigned to a board. I wasn't given any choice. I was assigned to the board. Now this wasn't for my resume, so to speak, but it was because I was in a new role and responsibility. And when I was assigned the board, the problem is I didn't have any passion for it. And I think some of you may have heard that it was a national organization, and I walked into a real financial crisis, and there was some real financial abuse, and it was really a mess. And so I didn't stay on there very long. I said, this is a real mess. I don't want to be involved in it, and I left. And I got into an organization which I had a lot of passion for. But it's so important that they pick out the board that meets the criteria that they're looking for, as well as what the organization is looking for.
We're going to talk a little bit more about strategic plans. Those of you that are nonprofits, how many of you have a strategic plan in place? Okay, of those of you that have a strategic plan in place, how current is that plan? Has that plan been developed in the last 12 months? Okay, so a few less hands. How many of you have an execution plan to that strategic plan? Okay, so a fewer hands yet. Okay, so I'm going to talk about sort of the components in our belief of good strategic plan. You have to start with the mission of the organization. What is the purpose? Number 2, the vision. And the vision's got to be inspiring, and it's got to be way out there, and it's got to be memorable, but it's got to get you excited, and it may be something that you never can ever reach. You know, that every child is in a loving home. You may not ever reach that mission, that vision, but it inspires people to help every child they possibly can get into nurturing family environment. Number 3, it should have values, and the values are, it's sort of how that organization agrees to behave, and it's really important in terms of supporting the mission and the vision of that organization. It should have like a 3-year strategic direction, so we've got to reach out and say, okay, you know, that's our vision, but 3 years from now we want to look like this. You know, we want these kinds of services, we want to be in these locations, we want a staff like this, we want a reputation like this or a brand, we want to be able to fundraise X dollars. So it really gives parameters 3 years out, and then back up and say, what's our 1-year plan? What are the 3 to 5 most important goals for the next year? And then how do we measure against those goals to see if we're successful? And then what are strategic initiatives for each of those goals? So how are we really going to achieve that? And then that information is rolled into an execution plan. Action, who's accountable, due date. And that plan then goes into every board meeting and every staff meeting to see, are we on track or not on track? So a good strategic plan has vision, mission, values, 3-year strategic direction, 1-year goals, the metrics in place to measure it, strategic initiatives against each of those goals, and then that rolls into your execution plan.
You know, actually, one of the great things, Joan came to my organization, and she actually did not join the organization. We've just gotten married, and she said, I'm not going to work for you. And so she set up her own consulting practice in the floor below me in an executive suites. And so one of the first things that we did is we hired Joan to do strategic planning with us. And so there are a couple things that are really important. I've been in strategic plans and planning processes for many, many companies. And yours may be the same thing, where you get a strategic plan and you put it on the back bar and nobody opens it up until maybe 11 months later, and we're getting ready for strategic planning again. That's not a strategic plan. A strategic plan has to be one that has accountabilities. It's living on a day-to-day basis. And Joan brought this living process to my organization, and it had accountabilities for me, and I had timelines and due dates. I hated it. Absolutely hated it. I didn't like that stuff. But she had it that way, and then our head of the fellow who was leading our consulting came to me and said, we can't let her out there. We got to get her into this firm, or otherwise she's going to be competing against us. And so, you know, she didn't know anybody in the Kansas City community at that time. And so I figured, you know, it's not a big deal. But as it turned out, she did join us. I kind of coerced her. But she made our strategic planning process come alive. It came alive. And as a result, every staff meeting we had, we were accountable for the things that were in the strategic plan. Because they're really important. And if you don't have them accountable, they can't be important. Whether it be fundraising, if you talk about and have accountability for fundraising once a year, how important is it? It's not. And so strategic planning is really important to be held accountable and to make it a living document. Next thing is succession management. that we're going to talk about. And by the way, most of you are executive directors of working with an organization at this time. And there are a few people that are in here that are prospective candidates for board seats. And so as we go through this process, we're looking at what makes an agency, an organization, a good organization, one that you want to be connected to. And these are the ingredients, these are the dimensions you should be looking for. And you should be asking, when somebody comes to you and says, will you serve on this organization, you should be saying, why? What kinds of things do you offer? And I want to see more about your mission. And by the way, what makes me think, why should I think that you're going to be in business 5 years from now? And so these are strategic questions you need to be asking before you join any board of directors. And so it's just looking at this saying, okay, this is what the ideal organization has, and this is what I want to be connected with. Succession management. Who's it succession management for? Anybody? Come on, you had lunch, but you have to talk now. So who's succession management for? Okay, the organization. Who in the organization?
Everybody.
Yeah, the answer is everybody. It's not just the executive director. It's virtually everybody. And it should be for the directors, yes. It should be... I forgot to talk about this. In your packets, I think you have a evaluation form. And take a minute just to look at that evaluation form. Does everybody have that? Take a look at that evaluation form and honestly rate your board. Now, I have here right off the bat, somebody's laughing and saying, holy smokes. You know, by the way, if you don't do well, that's not any black mark. It's just an area for growth and improvement. And I can't tell you the number of organizations that don't do well, including Fortune 50 and 500 companies.
We did this last week in our Leaders Edge class over in Fort Walton with 14 executive directors of nonprofits, and there was a huge range in terms of scores. I think the low was, Andrew, was it like 6 or 7? And then the high was pretty high, which I won't mention because that person's in the room, but it was the full range, and a lot of them were in the 6, 10, or 12 range. So this is an area that typically nonprofits don't address, and it should be addressed not only by the executive director, but by the board and the chair of the board.
Okay, as we go on, we obviously need to have a successor for the executive director. We have to have a successor for the chair, successor for committee chairs, executive director successor, key staff successors. If you haven't thought about some of your key staff successors, before Directing would dial telephone numbers and before cell phones and all that sort of thing. And 1993, one of the key people that was in my organization was the receptionist. And nowadays we don't have as many receptionists anymore, but at that time everything came into her. And if she was cranky, what do you think the impression was for people that called in? A pretty cranky organization. And so a person, just because they're a custodian or a receptionist, those are important positions. And I used to say that the people that clean things, they're just as critical as I was, because if they didn't come in and clean, we're going to have a problem the next day. And so they were problem solvers, and they might have been just cleaners, but there's nothing about being just a cleaner. They're important to the organization and the So you need to think in terms of how do you replace people as you go through the whole process, and each employee should have a development plan. How many of your employees have a development plan? Whoops, anybody raise their hands here? Because every employee should have a development plan. One of the things you may have heard us talk about is that Joan and I own the technology company in Omaha. Everyone up there has a development plan. And it's specifically done for that individual. And sometimes it's outside classes. And sometimes it's personal development in another area. And so everybody should have that as part of their performance within the organization.
We're going to start moving into board recruitment, and we have a number of areas that improves, but hopefully will help you in terms of your board recruitment. And the first one is, what are the personal characteristics of really effective board members? And this is really coming out of some research done by BoardSource. BoardSource is a great organization that really supports nonprofits in their boards and in their operations and so forth. But they talk a little bit about the personal characteristics. The first large category is really more about how that person thinks. So their ability to listen, their ability to analyze information, their ability to solve problems. So that whole intellectual capability and capacity component is really important in a board member. The second big area is their willingness to prepare for board meetings, for committee meetings, for events. So really that ability to prepare, the willingness to prepare, but also to follow through. So if they're given an assignment or a project, that they follow through 100% of the time. So preparedness and follow through, extremely important in a board member. The third big category is really their willingness to learn. People come and serve on boards and they don't know everything that they need to be an effective board member. They may have never done fundraising before, and they may be terrified about fundraising. So that board may need a board development half day or full day with a fundraising consultant that comes in and puts together a comprehensive fundraising plan, but actually has the board members think through and maybe even role play how to do the ask, so that they become more comfortable with doing an ask, and also that they see that their role is important in fundraising. You can learn how to be a fundraiser. That's not something that we're born with. It's something that we are taught, and it takes practice to get comfortable with it and to become more effective. Second area, financial acumen. Not everybody who serves on a board has the financial acumen to really understand those financials. Organizations that often get in trouble have boards that are not good in financial acumen and they're not watching the finances. We did strategic planning out of this area, and it was with a nonprofit that in 2 years lost half of their funding. Now, the executive director kept telling them that we're in trouble. We've got to do fundraising. We've got to do something. We've got to cut expenses. We've got to do something. And the board was passive and waited till they were in big trouble. That is how nonprofits go out of business. That board had the fiduciary responsibility to make sure that they were financially okay. And that meant either fundraising or cutting expenses or both to make sure that that organization stayed in the black. So that board is not an effective board and really has led to this organization's sustainability being in a questionable range. We're doing strategic planning, trying to get them back on track, but it's a pretty sad situation. So willingness to learn, fundraising, financial acumen. The fourth category is really all about values. That's integrity, it's ethics, it is being a caring person, it is somebody who's passionate about your mission, passionate about your services, passionate about the population that you serve. You want passion and a future board member. But a person who can work independently, so self-starting, but also a person who works effectively as a team. So they're collaborators. They also are community links. They can link your organization and the community and serve as an ambassador role. Really, really important. Steve and I had an individual that we knew that we thought would be really good on the Destin Charity Wine Auction Board, which we serve on. This guy, really, really smart, built a huge global business, sold it before he was 50 years old. I mean, really, really smart guy. And as we started recruiting him, it became clear to us that he was going to become very disruptive on this board. He wanted every financial, he wanted to see our bylaws, he wanted to see our 990s. He asked all these really good questions, and that is good that he wanted to do that research and analysis, but he had an edge to him, and everything was not good enough. And why did you do it that way? And it was clear to us that he was not going to be a collaborator. He was not going to be a team player. He was going to come in and be critical of everything going on in that organization and be so disruptive that he would not let us progress. So we decided that we would not recruit him to the board. Even though he was really bright, so he had that whole first category, he could analyze, he could listen, he could think, he could problem solve. He was really pretty high performing, so that second category, he was really good at preparing and doing his homework and doing follow-through. He was really good at that. Third category, I mean, he was very willing to learn. Fourth category, on the values, he wasn't a team player. He wasn't collaborative. He was going to be disruptive. And he was not going to help our board move forward. So those personal characteristics, as you start thinking about who do we want to target to serve on our boards, don't forget that category, all four of those areas, because I think they're critically important to individuals that make really effective board members.
Okay, I got a little lost with you here. I got a little
That's
lost,
it.
but it's pretty easy to find people like this. Whoa, wait, what's the chuckling about? Not so easy? In a nice place like Pensacola, this should be really easy because it's a bigger population than we have in Destin. And so you should be able to find this easily. By the way, I don't think you need to take notes. You have this, don't you? Okay. Where do you find the good board members? Where do you guys find the good board members? How do you do that? What?
I say talk to a lot of people.
Talk to a lot of people, okay? Okay. What's that?
Through other good board members.
Other good board members, absolutely. Anybody else?
People in industries that our organizations are after.
Absolutely. People in industry. Anybody else?
People who come to our events.
People who come to your events. Anybody else?
I can tell you how I started finding board members, and that was 38 years ago. And it's not as easy to do today, but through the newspaper, today you have to use a lot of different media to figure out what people are doing, their areas of interest and passion.
I probably would question the newspaper today because it's not quite the same dynamic. But LinkedIn might be an avenue. I hadn't really thought about LinkedIn, but it might be. But one of the great things that's happening today is you're here with other executive directors and colleagues. You find good board members within your own organization, your own colleagues, your collegial discussions. You executive directors should be talking with other executive directors. They should be having some exchange with other executive directors. Two things happen. In a small community, there are lots of candidates, but oftentimes those candidates are on boards. Well, a good functioning board should have an automatic period of time that they rotate off the board. And so if you're talking with one executive director, one of the questions you should be asking them is, not when's your next fundraising event, have you got any good board members that maybe their term is up and it's time for them to rotate off? And so you can find some great board members by communication with other executive directors. And as your board members of other nonprofits, business leaders, everybody wants the mayor. Well, I don't know, I'm not sure in this town, but I think everybody wants civic leaders and that sort of thing. And so yes, you do. You want people that are coming out of local leadership programs. And oftentimes the local leadership programs have younger people new in their career. And boy, you'd be surprised the energy they bring to a board. And they fire it up and they have great questions. And by the way, one of the things, the characteristic that I love is a board member that will ask questions, but not in a critical way. You know what I'm talking about. Why did you do that? And instead of, hey, help me to understand how that decision was made. Whole different attitude. And so Joan was talking about that fellow that we knew, and he was the critical questioning. The young professionals groups, you have them in Pensacola, and they're all throughout the country. Boy, they have great energy. Relocating retirees. In this area, we have a lot of retirees. Many of them have tons of skills and bring a lot to the party. And so they can be people that have had a world of experience that can be brought to your nonprofit
So they bring
organization.
time, talent, and potentially treasure. So these are great category. Can I just back up and add one thing, Stephen? Sorry.
Back up?
You don't have to back up in this slide.
Okay.
Young professional groups. We were doing this board effectiveness training at Northwest Florida State College probably a couple months ago. I think we had the food stores in alone that day. And we had 3 individuals that were alumni of the Okaloosa Leadership Walton for young professionals. So they were probably, I would guess, mid-30s, early 40s in age. And we had a whole group of individuals that are currently serving on boards that were over age 60. And one of the gentlemen in the audience in that category said, I don't believe that young professionals make good board members. And I am like, because we had introduced everybody, and so he knew who was in the audience, and I was like, wow, I can't believe it. And I said, I disagree with you 100%. And I said, these young people bring to you not only talent, but energy. And they're going to bring things to you that an older board never could bring to you, like social media marketing. I mean, they get that stuff. They get events with their age group in a whole different way. I mean, they can spread the word in ways that my brain can't even comprehend. And so the young professionals in the audience did step up and said, hey, listen, we're passionate about serving, and we know that we have the time and we have the commitment to make a true difference. Okay, done with my little sidebar.
Sidebar's over. One of the things you want to consider also, non-board committee members. How many have committees within your agencies? Not a whole lot of hands came up, or they didn't come up real high that time. And how many are, I want to see who has non-board members on a committee. Hey, that's great. That is really great, because they're a potential real leader for the organization, and you can contagiously infect them with the passion of the mission. Contagiously infect them with the passion of the mission, where they, hey, I want to get involved. I want to do more. And
would you add trailing spouses to that?
Sure. Trailing spouses could very well be great candidates for board members. Yeah. Who do you consider for a board member? Virtually all community and business leaders, anybody that's in a leadership position. If they're in a leadership position, one of the things they bring to you is connections. They can bring you connections to fundraising. They bring you, usually, if they're business leaders, community leaders, they have some fiscal background, some understanding of the finances. Professionals within the community, they can be doctors, lawyers, accountants, whatever. But professionals can be really good. Current and prospective donors. Boy, if somebody gives you a fairly handsome donation, that's a person I want to get closer to. Because they have something that they really like about your organization. and that would be a great candidate. People who have benefited from the nonprofit. People passionate about your mission. You know, you're going to hear Joan and I talk about passion about the mission, passion about the mission. It is so important to be passionate about what you do. And it's so important for that board of directors to be just as passionate, because after the meeting once a month, they are what for you? Ambassadors, absolutely. They should be out there and on your mission. You know, we don't have real tall buildings here, but there's the elevator speech, and so they have to make that elevator speech short in order to get up to the top floor. There's not as many stories here, but they should have your mission as their elevator speech, and they should be able to recite that with passion, get people excited. Hey, we do some great work. I mean, how many accountants, this is a great thing for an accountant to have be connected to a nonprofit, because what are they going to talk about? Your taxes? You know, going up in the elevator? No, they want to talk about something that's more exciting, and your organizations are definitely more exciting. And where do you look for the prospective board members? Trade professional associations, fraternal associations, university and colleges, religious organizations, service clubs, community centers. You know, all of those, that's the entire community we're talking about. And there are some real hidden gems out there as potential board members. And you know why they aren't serving in any of your organizations? Never been asked. You're right. Absolutely dead on target. You have to get out there, find them, and ask them.
We, in our personal connections, know of an executive director of a nonprofit in Colorado Springs, and that person was sharing with us their experience in recruiting board members. And the more we heard, the more we liked what they were doing. It's a CASA program, so it's a Child Advocacy Support System program. And this particular nonprofit is considered the most distinguished nonprofit to serve on in the Colorado Springs area, which means everybody wants to serve on it. And they have a 2-year waiting list to get on the board. I had never heard of that before. A waiting list? People that have been vetted, and wait till you hear how well they were vetted. I mean, people had to go through interviews and fill out multiple forms and write essays. And in your packet for the next 10 pages, we have taken some of their information with their permission, so that you can see sort of their process of how they go about vetting a person. So when they have the initial meeting with that person, they sit down and it's over a lunch, and they come in already prepared. And so in that lunch, it's going to be a dialogue. So you're going to be asking questions and listening, as well as providing information. You're going to be going over the vision and the mission, your strategic plan, your plan for the board. You're going to be talking about your committee structures. You're going to be talking about board member expectations and what the time commitment is for all of that. And also what the fundraising menu is. Now, every time you bring this up, people get a little nervous. Fundraising menu. Yes, they present a fundraising menu of things that they expect of board members before they ever even accept being on that board. But they're also listening to the person about, tell me a little bit about why you are interested in our mission, in our services, in our agency. Tell me a little bit about other nonprofits you've served on and your board experience. And tell me about your other commitments in terms of work and family, and perhaps you're serving on other boards or other committees, or you have other obligations. You know, what time do you have to serve on our board? Talking a little bit about term limits. So trying to give a lot of information, but also asking the right questions to see which person fits. Are they passionate about our mission? Do they fit in our culture? You know, do they belong? Because fit is so critically important. And that is just the first interview. Then they're given the application packet, which is the pages that you have. And I'm not going to go over all of them in detail. But the next one is an actual application form that is 2 pages in length that they complete. And part of that is some questions like, how did you hear about our nonprofit? What do you hope to bring to our nonprofit? Would serving on our board pose any conflicts of interest? If so, what is the conflict of interest? Please describe any previous experience you have working for nonprofit organizations and detail any previous experience you have had serving on boards or committees. So that's all in the application. Then there's a board demographic information form. So this is a particular board where they want cross-section of the general population serving, representing on their board. But notice under languages, English and sign, we know of a board in our area where they have board members that are fluent in Spanish, and it's because they serve a Spanish-speaking community, so they want both staff and board members that can interact with their clientele. It also asks about employment status. The next page is a self-evaluation. I think this is really interesting. What motivates me to be a part of this board? Is this the right organization for me to help? Does it deal with an important problem? Does it deal effectively with that problem? What are the circumstances of this nonprofit? What is expected of me? What skills or resources do I bring to the table? And what are my risks in joining this board? So it gets down to really the hairy questions on board service. The next page is board expertise information sheet. So it's asking, what expertise do you have? Now the person might be currently serving as a sales executive or general manager, but as they fill it out, they might say, well, you know, I did start out in accounting, so I guess I do have some accounting expertise. Or I love technology, and so that's sort of my pet interest, and I do a lot of reading, a lot of playing with technology. Okay, so now we get to the board member fundraising menu, and is this on page 20 of yours? Sometimes the page numbering gets a little different when we reproduce it, different organizations reproduce it. I'm going to read through this in detail, and then I'm going to have you react to it. And we have had the full range of reactions, believe me. Board members will be responsible for identifying a total of 10 new financial prospects for us and agree to participate in the following ways. Make an annual gift as generous as possible as part of the annual board campaign. Host a table at our breakfast, lunch, or dinner fundraiser. Tables hold 10 to 12 people. This particular case, CASA does a breakfast that raises $380,000 in 1 hour. How do they do that? You got it right here, right? Everybody on the board has to host a table, and they bring their friends that are going to be very generous in contributing to that breakfast, and the expectation is known by everyone. Nobody is surprised by it. People understand it. They love going to that breakfast. They love it when this year's breakfast raised more than last year's breakfast. They get into the competition. How much money can we raise in an hour? They love it. And of course at the breakfast it's beautifully orchestrated, so the timing is perfect, and they have a child who does a testimonial, and everybody cries. Because that is how you raise more money. It's all purposeful. Write a personal note on solicitations for a holiday appeal. Write thank you letters at board meetings to significant donors and contributors. Participate in major donors relationship plan, adopting 2 or more donors, communicating with them throughout the year, and coordinating an annual lunch or coffee with each. So donor recognition, really important, hand-holding of the important donors, but everybody participates. It is not just the executive director or CEO's responsibility. Everybody on the board has a role. Attend the annual donor recognition reception. Attend annual corporate reception, so the corporate sponsors have a separate reception. Participate in some of the following activities. Be a member of campaigns or investment committee, fundraising events committee. Help with phone follow-ups on written solicitations or thank you calls to donors. Call on corporations or foundations when possible and speak on behalf of the organization as part of the speakers bureau. That is a long list. Now react. Go ahead.
Well, not really reaction, but a question that has come up for us because we are very, very, very small. How do you bridge this, attend the annual donor recognition reception? We talked about doing something like that, but we are in desperate need of funds, and we want people who would like to donate to think that we need those funds more than we need to entertain them. How do you bridge that gap without them going, wait a minute, if you really need our funds so much, how come you're throwing this bash?
Okay, so what we did, this is one idea, the Destin Charity Wine Auction, we had no budget line for our sponsor recognition. And yet we felt that we needed a sponsor recognition as well as a volunteer recognition, because we use the volunteers of the 14 charities that are part of us for all of our wine and food. And so the board said, okay, how are we going to get this done? And we did have some leftover wine. So we had some wine available, which helped. And we decided that the board would serve in this capacity. So the board planned it, actually I planned it, and I asked every board member to bring an appetizer dessert. We found free space, which happened to be on our property, and we went around and got all that we needed necessary, the bottled waters, what we were going to use for free entertainment, so we got that donated. We did have to pay for some tabletops and some of the linens. Stephen and I donated that. So it was completely organized, planned, all of it served, all of the food came from the board of directors. The staff was not involved. And so it did not take $1 away. The people that attended knew that. Now, when they come to our events, we ask them to wear black tops and black pants and to, serve, pour in the wine and not to imbibe in the wine during the event, but afterwards they are free to have food and wine. And so we did exactly the same, which was really hard for our board not to drink through the whole event. But we dressed in the black pants and skirts and the black tops, and we served them. And they loved that we served them. It meant so much to them, and it was from the board to them. So it did not take any money away from our charities. We wanted to make that really clear.
I think it's a great question, and taking away from the services you provide by doing a bash for your donors, I think you have to go back as an organization and as a board of directors and say, is this what we want us to be? Is this the bash that we need to provide? And you might also ask some of your donors what they feel about the bash. Because they may come up and say, hey, we don't want a bash. We'd like to sit down and have coffee or whatever. And so you really have to question some of these events that you have. And so often organizations I've found do events year after year after year. That's the way we've always done it. But times are changing, and times are changing for fundraising. And so you may be saying, maybe we ought to do something different, a new idea, challenge us, do it. So, because listen, the funds are getting more and more scarce, and especially if you have state funds or federal funds that come to you, that's all changing. But even on a local basis of donations, companies that used to provide huge amounts don't provide so huge amounts anymore. And so how do you get funds? And there is an answer. But you have to really inspect yourself. Ask the question, is it doing what you want it to do? And is it helping the people that are contributors? Do they feel good about it? I think that's a real question you have to ask yourself.
And I'm using the term bash generously because it's not, we just don't have that capability, but we did talk about doing something, and it's like, but how can we really justify doing anything when we are so...
And recognition looks different to different people. As Stephen said, you have to check with who it is that you're trying to recognize to see what's meaningful. And when we went back to the charities after this year's volunteer recognition event, they said we absolutely loved it. We were a little disappointed that more of our volunteers didn't come, but they're really, really busy people. And this year we said, well, one of the things we're going to give every volunteer is a free ticket to the Sunday, what is it called? Beaches of South Walton Food and Wine Festival, that they have free tickets. And they said, do that in lieu of the event next year. They will love it. So they came up with something that they thought was the equivalent recognition That means that the board doesn't have to do the event as we had it last year. So I think it is that dialogue, understanding what works, and being real honest, we don't have a budget line item for this. So how do we recognize in a meaningful way without spending money? Next in your packet is confidentiality statement, and many nonprofits also have a conflict of interest statement, trying to identify if there are any potential conflicts of interest ahead of time, but also trying to make it clear that what happens in a board meeting when you're talking about financial resources or issues with staff or issues with service delivery stays in that room. That information should not be spread around the community. That's not serving as a good ambassador. And then there's a checklist form. But going back to, if you don't remember anything else from our 3 hours together, please understand that we are challenging you to raise the bar. You do the due diligence on the board members. You let them know that you have high expectations for board members. You let your current board know that you're going to have high expectations of new people you're recruiting, so are they willing to take a step up? And that can be a conversation with the board, yes.
So, I just developed a new board member packet, and actually just handed it out to the board at our last board meeting. Would you recommend that we go back to the board members that have been around for years, actually, and have them run through all this, like reapply? And my follow-up question is, who gets to actually see those applications? We don't have a nominating committee currently. Is that something the executive director would review, and
It
just
should
the
be,
entire board look at these entire applications?
sometimes it's done by the executive committee. They're the ones on the board, along with the executive director, that do the recruiting of new board members. Sometimes it's in a nominating committee. Sometimes there's a committee called Board Effectiveness Committee, and they do everything from trying to recruit, orientate new board members. They bring board development to the board, sessions on fundraising, and they also evaluate the board. So they're responsible for keeping that board very effective, and that's called a Board Effectiveness Committee. So different organizations have different boards. If you have an existing board, you're coming up with a new packet. It's really having a discussion with them about, hey, we're raising the standards of people who are going to serve on this board, but we really need to have an honest discussion on our current expectations of board members. And should we all adopt this, or should we grandfather in the current board and just have it for new board members? And have that open dialogue. What we're finding is that most boards will sign up for the higher expectations because it is difficult to have two different standards on the board. You have half the board that have been there a long time and they're attending 30% of the board meetings, and the new people are being told they have to attend 75%. It becomes pretty apparent that you have a double standard. And so really having the honest discussion with them that we want to raise the standards because it's going to allow us to be more effective and it's going to build more sustainability, but what are you guys willing to do? And there will be some that say, hey, I think we should raise it, but probably not right for me. I've got now a spouse who meets me at home, they've got some dementia issues and whatever, in which case, how do you hold that really loyal board member in place in some important role? So then it's, do we have a board of trustees or an advisory board that's different than the board of directors, or is there a key project? We have this fundraising event coming up, would they be willing to chair that? So finding another role that fits for them based on their talents and the time commitment they're willing to make for you, but that they're still invested in helping you be successful. They're still ambassadors. They still have a role, but maybe it's not being on that board. Maybe it's a different role.
Having the existing board fill out the forms is irrelevant, I think. I would want them to approve the process. This is what we're going to use going forward. It would be a time that the executive director and the chairperson, maybe the executive committee, sit down and say, what board members aren't pulling their weight? And what if you had a board member that says, I'm not very engaged? And so what if you have a board member that's missed more than 75% of the meetings? I mean, what do you do with that person? And old Joe or old Jane has been on this board for 15 years. Well, that doesn't necessarily make a good board member. In fact, I would say it makes a bad board member. I believe in term limits and having people rotate off the board because they can get re-energized doing something else. And frankly, there's a life expectancy of a board member of when they bring good ideas, good questions, don't get trapped into the old ways of doing things. That life expectancy, I think, is probably about 5 years. If you've been on a board more than 5 years, you need to question, am I really bringing anything to the party? And so you have to look at your board members, the existing ones, as to who are real players, who are bringing things to the party, who are making true contributions. And if they aren't, then you have to start thinking about how do we get rid of old Joe or old Jane.
Now you saw in those 10 pages of that board recruitment packet that there's a lot of information that's exchanged. And it's more than one sit-down meeting. We talked about that first meeting and all that was covered in that first meeting. And actually, Stephen, that's on this slide. So you're going to share the mission, vision, strategic plan, the nonprofit's impact. You're going to ask about their interest in your mission. You're going to ask about their other commitments. Do they have the time to serve? You're going to review the board member expectations and review that fundraising menu so that it's clear ahead of time what you expect of those board members. And it's a dialogue. It is not you making all the presentations.
One other question, on this board member self-evaluation sheet, is that for turning in the application for the nominating committee or executive committee or board at home to look at? Or is it something that's for them to use personally and not share?
I think they share that. All of these forms would be shared with either the executive director or with the nominating committee. And so the recruitment, really executive director, along with either executive committee, nominating committee, board effectiveness committee, but being really, really clear in terms of expectations of that board member and what you're looking for in the board member. And we're going to talk in a bit about how you can put together one of those board matrices to figure out where are we at now with expertise, knowledge, skills, experiences on our current board, and what do we need moving forward based on our strategic plan? Where are our gaps? So being very targeted in terms of who you're looking for, not only in terms of their personal characteristics, but also what knowledge, skills, experiences, connections they can bring to your board.
You know, one of the things that Joan went over is the CASA application form, which you've got somewhat cleansed. And we don't want you to adopt it. We want you to think about it and see what parts of it work for you. And so you look at that and you know that CASA in Colorado Springs had a 2-year waiting list of people that wanted to get on the board. And so you have to say, well, Colorado Springs is a lot bigger than Pensacola. It's not. Pensacola and Colorado Springs are probably about the same size. Well, our people in Pensacola wouldn't go through an application process like this. I guarantee you, many years ago, CASA board of directors didn't go through an application process like this, and they may have been in the same seats you're in today. And so the question is, how can you strengthen your nonprofit? How can you get better board selection? And this is a great way to raise the bar for yourself. I've never seen one as good as this, and actually I've never gone through an application process. Of all the boards I've served on, I've never really gone through an application process of anything more than a small one-pager, and so it never got into any depth about what I really was passionate about. And I usually would have a lunch with the executive director and the chairperson, and they would ask me questions, and do you really want to serve on our board? I don't know.
As you raise the bar and you raise expectations and you become more selective, you become more desirable. It's hard to believe. You know, we raise the expectations and we have more demands and we expect them to participate in that fundraising menu. Isn't that going to scare them away? Actually, people like to be part of a winning team. What you're doing is you're making the whole process more professional, and you're more selective, and people want to be in that small selected team of winners. So it will have the opposite effect than you're probably hearing, I believe.
Yeah, I'll just share with you, when I was just new into my own business, it was really growing nicely. And a person I knew, not terribly well, but he was the former president of Hallmark, and he had retired, and so I thought he'd be a great advisor for me. And so I met with him for lunch, and I popped the question to him, and would you be willing to serve on my advisory board? And which is like a board of directors in many ways. And you know what he said to me? Why? Why would I want to join your organization in an advisory capacity? And I hadn't thought about it. and so I was really floored, and I danced a bit. I must have danced okay, because he did decide to be on my advisory board. And but he asked the question, why? You need to ask the question too. Why should anybody join your board of directors? And by the way, for the board of directors that are in this room that might be looking at various boards, you should be asking that question to the board of directors, to the executive director and the chairperson. Why should I think about joining your organization?
Okay. So these are all the components. Prospective board meeting. So this is the first sit-down meeting. You're going over sort of the committees, the time commitments, the term of office. You're asking about their expertise. You're reviewing that whole application and recruitment packet with them, and also talking about the next steps. So that initial lunch, we're going over everything, is not the lunch where everybody says, yeah, I'm in, or yeah, we want you. It's really just the first step in a longer process.
Okay. Going to the board applicants checklist, I'll go through this fairly quickly. However, I will tell you of a question I asked a board member about, actually in the checklist, complete the application form, demographic information, self-evaluation sheet, personal information, board expertise, board commitment, committee interest, fundraising expectations. Fundraising expectations. I asked a person who was had a professional job that really traveled the state, should the board of directors be involved in fundraising? What do you think?
Yes.
What do you think this person's response was?
No.
Absolutely not. And I said, well, tell me why that is. I am terrified to ask somebody for money. And I just don't want to do it. I don't think I could say anything. And so I said to this person, if you are in Topeka, Kansas, which is the capital of Kansas, and you are there in a professional capacity, and we had discovered a new foundation that opened up in Topeka, Kansas, would you be willing to go and meet with that organization and tell about this one? And she said, well, absolutely, yes, but that's not like asking for money. And I said, well, what does that do? It develops relationships. And that's the start of asking for money, by the way, is developing relationships. And if we went back to that organization with the executive director and formally asked for money, would you be willing to go with them? Well, of course. So, when you say, I want you to be involved in fundraising, you need to make sure that it is something that they understand. Does that mean that you expect a board member to go to your next door neighbor and say, how about $2,500? And, it's not that easy for people to ask for money. It's really difficult. The other thing that's not easy for people to do is to stand up and do public speaking. But that's what people dread. what is even worse than public speaking is asking people for money. And so asking for, hey, would you think about maybe a $10,000 sponsorship? Oh, wait a minute, that's not easy. You know what they can say? Are you nuts? Are you crazy? Of course I'm not going to give you a $10,000 sponsorship. How could you be so stupid? They don't say that, by the way.
They can.
But
And then Stephen would immediately say, well, how about 5,000?
how about 5,000? And then if they agreed to the 5,000, I'd say, oh my God, I should have asked for 10. In any event, some people are not meant to ask for money directly, but they'll be in a supportive role. They'll play in a supportive role which helps the organization. So fundraising is really important. And then Joan has actually already gone over the conflict of interest, but you know something? What takes place in your board meetings is minutes and it's for record, but it should be kept confidential. I mean, you shouldn't be going off to the neighbors and saying, oh, you know what happened at this meeting last night? There should be a degree of confidentiality. Even in a public meeting, there should be some, hey, we're just not going to go out and talk about it and try to generate discussion in the community about what happens at our meeting. If it's a public meeting and the community has interest, they should come to the meeting.
I just want to add a piece to when Stephen interviewed this board member recently and asked whether they thought that the board should be responsible for fundraising. We interviewed 7 board members. 3 of them said yes, the board should be responsible for fundraising. 3 said no, and 1 said, I don't know. We were shocked. Now, we interviewed the entire staff, and 100% of the staff said that the board should be responsible for fundraising. The board members that didn't believe that the board should be responsible said that's a staff function. I think they have to get it straight. And yes, the board is ultimately responsible to make sure that that organization has the financial resources to be sustainable and fulfill their mission. We've already said that. So they do have a role. Now there can be staff folks that are involved in fundraising as well, grant writing or other kinds of fundraising, planning special events. And the ideal is that everybody knows who's responsible for what part and they collaborate. Because if you can get the board fundraising activities supported by the staff fundraising activities, then you can have a powerful linkage and really make something happen. So both are responsible, yes, but the board is definitely responsible for fundraising. Now, who is really effective in fundraising on boards? People that have done fundraising in the past, obviously, so that may be a targeted area for you, finding somebody on the board who has that experience and has been successful. Salespeople, they're good at it. Even if they've never done it, you can teach them. But they know how to make asks, and they're not afraid to make asks. So salespeople are really good in fundraising roles on the board. They're also really good in recruiting people to your board, because there is a little bit of that, why you're desirable and why they want to come and be a part of you. So think a little bit about sort of the skills and the abilities and experiences that may help you strengthen your fundraising capabilities on the board. Are you up or am I? Engaged?
Well, actually, I was just doing an adjustment to the heater here. Anybody getting warm?
Getting comfortable.
And I get threatened when people get warm because they start to doze off on me, and I start to feel bad if they doze off. Plus, when the head hits the desk, it makes a lot of noise.
Plus, it could cause concussion. So board engagement. Stephen, I think I have this first slide.
You do.
So board engagement. I want you to rate your board from 0, your board is totally unengaged, to 5, where your board is over-engaged. In fact, they're micromanaging. The ideal number is going to be a 4, that they are effectively engaged. So, anybody want to throw up the number that you came up with?
2, we decided 2.
2? Okay. And what did you have?
I was gonna say like 2.5.
2.5?
I take it that 2 is not on the high end of the spectrum, is that right?
Yeah.
Isn't that what?
Yeah, I did.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. You're 4?
Whoa,
Whoa, yay! Would you guys say it's 4?
3 here.
Yeah, but Would you also, the board members, would you rate yourselves a 4 on engagement?
I was gonna say 3.5, but I appreciate that
Sometimes we see that, like, some of the board members are really engaged, and then we have this whole other group that aren't engaged at all, so it's bimodal.
Yeah, we've got a good group. The rest would be here, but they're working.
Great. That is wonderful. So having an engaged board allows you to really leverage that board to get the important work done. And let me tell you some things that we have found to be effective in trying to engage a board. So if you're not where you want to be, what can you do about it? One is you can go through strategic planning with your board. So they are building the plan and hopefully getting energized and excited about the plan. And then when we get to the point of, okay, so what work needs to get done and who's going to do it, have the facilitator be clear that it's not going to fall on the shoulders of the executive director and the staff, that there needs to be board responsibilities as well. And so have people sign up. Look at the committee structure at the end of the strategic plan and say, what committees do we need in order to support this plan? And then actually say who's signing up for what committee, and then who's going to chair that committee, and when is that committee going to meet next, and what goals now is that committee assigned. So they're assigned accountabilities by committee. So that is one way to engage a board. There are other ways that you can engage a board. Requesting that board members serve on at least one committee or 2 committees. Some organizations actually require them to serve on 2. We did strategic planning recently with an organization that expected every board member to be on 2 or 3 committees. They had a very small board, like of 8 people, and then they had like 8 or 10 committees, and I was like, this is not going to work. Let's get down the number of committees here and the commitment, because it was just a little bit overwhelming. So serving on a committee is a way of engaging a board member. Trying to establish board expectations. So going through what is it that we expect of board members, and we're going to show you some samples of that. What of these things do we want to adopt? What would we change? But essentially kind of raise the bar in terms of expectations of board members. We had require financial contribution. We're strong proponents of that. We believe that 100% of your board members should contribute something financially. And we know that everybody has different budgets in their home, and so you might have one board member that can give $25,000 or $2,500, and somebody else who gives $25. The amount is not as important as 100% contributing. For people to say, I will give of my time and talent, but not of my dollars, is not good, because then when you go out and ask for others to contribute, you're writing a grant, and they want to know what percent of your board has contributed financially, and you're not 100%, you're at a disadvantage. If you're trying to get people to go out and do individual asks, they will often say, has 100% of your board contributed? So getting 100% financial commitment is, I believe, really important in your board. Start meetings with a mission moment. We do that at the Justin Charity Wine Auction. As I mentioned, there's 14 children's charities that we support. And we have one of those charities come to every one of our board meetings and make a presentation on the front end for 10 or 15 minutes. It's a mission moment, often a testimonial. They talk about the impact they're having. They talk about what our dollars have meant to them, what a difference it's made. Usually we get teary-eyed. And we were at a board meeting with a new board member who had not been through a mission moment before, and went out to dinner with him after just to answer his questions to see how he was feeling about the board. And he said, let me give $10,000 in sponsorship. I was so moved with that mission moment. That's what you want to have happen. So mission moments are very powerful. Have board coach staff in terms of development. We did a strategic planning with the nonprofit, and there was a real disconnect between the board and the staff. They really never came to events together. Staff people did not come and make presentations to board members or board meetings. The staff didn't even know really who was on the board, what work the board was doing. And so one of the things that we came up with, which I thought was an excellent idea, there's 2 things. One is that they were going to require in their board expectations that every board member spend 8 hours providing some service for that nonprofit. So they were going to go and observe or help or volunteer, work with the clientele alongside the staff. And the second thing, that certain board members might be asked to coach staff members on their professional development in an area of expertise. So if we had a board member that had marketing expertise and we had a staff member that was trying to get more involved in marketing, they would do lunches on a quarterly basis and share information. Okay, now again, we don't want a board member getting involved in managing operations, but knowledge transfer, I think, works. That is an area where a board member can be helpful with staff. But those are ways you can maybe engage board members. And sometimes that's doing an individual ask. It's knowing that that board member had expertise in marketing, and for the executive director or the chair of the board to have a lunch or breakfast and say, hey, listen, I know that you have some expertise in this area and the staff member is really eager to learn. Would you be willing to do a quarterly lunch with this person and just share your knowledge? So doing that individual ask can be pretty powerful in trying to get an individual board member more engaged or more involved. So any questions about board engagement? We talked about strategic planning. We talked about getting them involved in committees. We talked a little bit about financial contribution. We talked about getting them involved in either volunteering within your agency so they can learn more, or also coaching a staff member. Yeah.
There's a sort of a magic number for committees versus meetings. One of the things that we've been trying to value is how much committee involvement is too much involvement if we're having a monthly meeting, should we have a monthly meeting and then committee involvement? Do you feel like there's something that works, or is it just really talking to the board and see what you've done?
I think it has to be based on how you're structured around your strategic plan. I always go back to strategy because it has to allow you to execute on the strategy. The board that we're involved in has monthly meetings, but those meetings never last more than an hour and a half, and often they're an hour and 15, so they're very tightly run. And one of the reasons we can run them so tightly is we have extremely active committees, and everybody has to serve on one committee. So a lot of the work is done at the committee level. That only works if you have committee charters and the committees are given very clear authority in decision making. So his committee, he's recruitment, so he recruits vintners. So we have to go into Napa and
It's a tough job. But
several times a year to recruit vintners. Now he knows that if we're in Napa and we find out that Chuck Wagner at Camus is willing to meet with us, and if you don't know wine, drink Camus wine if you can once in your life. And it just came up, and we're sort of nearing the ends of the slots of folks, the vintners. We have about 20 celebrity vintners every year to our event. He knows, Camus, with their reputation, and Chuck Wagner coming to our event, no brainer, and he can make that decision on the spot. But he cannot name the honorary vintner of the year because that has to come out of his committee as a recommendation to the board, and then the board makes a vote on it. So if the committees, my committee is procurement. I do all the auction lots, which is hugely stressful because that's where we raise the major money. So last year we raised $1.2 million in 3 hours. And this year I've got to raise more than that because we went from 12 children's charities to 14. So I've got to raise more than that with the same auction lots with the same time span. Okay, so my committee is very focused on that. We're really clear in terms of our authority and what work we need to do. We meet on a monthly basis. I meet with the staff more than once a month. And so I'm meeting with the committee once a month, but then meeting with the staff. So I've got a board meeting every month. I've got my committee meeting every month, and then I've got to work with the staff in between to make sure that these auction lots come together and we can raise more than $1.2 million.
Are all your committee members on the board? Or
No.
They're not?
No, I use my committee as a feeder, and so I recruit non-board members, and it's people that are really busy and really smart and really effective, and they say, we can't serve on your board, we don't have time. So he'll just come serve on my committee, and by the way, I serve wine and cheese at my committee meetings, so you want to be on my committee, not his committee, because he doesn't do it at his committee meetings. And so we get them involved. Once they get involved, then we might say, if they're really effective at the committee level, would you consider serving on the board the following year? Which we have done to bring in some really effective, high talent. And sometimes, the non-board committee members will just serve in that capacity and never come up on the board, but are really effective in that role. So it's not always just a recruiting mechanism. It really is sometimes because we have so much work to get done. We have a lot of committees, we need a lot of people involved to pull this off. And as I said, trying to keep your staff small so that you can give away more dollars. So we only have 3 full-time staff. Our budget was 1.8 million last year with 3 staff. So you can imagine how busy they are. So if we didn't have active committees, we would have to have more staff. We give away fewer dollars, and that defeats our purpose. So we tell people coming on our board, this is the gig. This is how we're structured. This is why we're structured that way. Keeps us a Class A nonprofit because we're always giving away a lot more than what our administrative costs are.
The Destin Charity Wine Auction, it's not perfect at all. And it is a Class A charity. But we are always questioning, does this make sense? Is this a good move? Will we get mileage out of this? Will it give us more revenue than we used to children's charities? So we're always challenging ourselves. There's another wine auction in this state way far away from us, and they have these really fantastic invitations that are just tremendously impactful. I mean, they're beautiful. They're engraved. I mean, it's like something you unless you saw it, you couldn't believe it.
But Save the Date is that way too. So I don't know what their graphic and printing costs, but I know their postage is $2.70 for a Save the Date alone, and then the invitation to the wine auction is even more than that. They spend
and their revenue has been going down every year
for the last 3 or 4
years. And so you have to question. Okay, I was successful in the cooling off. Yes. Tell me if you're too cold down to that. But you have to ask the question. Is this going to work for the mission? Does this really help?
But you have to go back to your strategic plan and say, okay, this is what we want to accomplish. Okay, do we have the right committees to do it? How many people do we need on those committees? Do we need some non-board members on those committees? Do we need folks that have expertise in certain areas on those committees to really make that happen? And then what do we need from a staff standpoint? And is our staff structured right? Do we need to add a position, in marketing because we need to become more visible? So many nonprofits, when we do their strategic planning, say we are the best kept secret. That is not a good thing. You do not want to be the best kept secret. You want to be very visible, very engaged with the community, and the community understands the importance of your impact, and they want to help you be successful. They are on your team. They will volunteer. They will go to your events. They will help you recruit people on the board. Maybe they're too busy to serve, but they know somebody else in the community that is really effective and would be great on your board. So you've got to not be the best kept secret. It comes up almost every time. It's like, really? Really?
Okay, we're going to talk a little bit about best practices, and I'm going to go through this fairly fast. I just want to be cognizant of our time. But best practices. If there's anything that we can give to you today, it's a pause that says you take a step out of your day-to-day dues. Because all of you have plates that are filled to the top. All of you have challenges. All of you have fundraising needs. You have service needs. You have needs of the staff. And by the way, the more staff you get, the more like you feel like you're a teacher or a principal of a school, because everybody seems to be needy of the executive director. But step out of it. Take a pause and look at your organization. What's right, what could use some improvement, and maybe what's wrong. So best practices is a good way to say, hey, is my organization that I'm responsible for, or if you're a prospective board member, does this organization follow along with best practices? Develop job descriptions. Who are the job descriptions for, by the way? Well, it's not for the staff. This is for the board. Have a board that has job descriptions, especially for the officers. The staff should have, everybody in the staff should have job descriptions as well.
And I think I heard somebody say something about volunteers. And yes, absolutely. The volunteer coordinator position, if it's volunteer or not, or paid, doesn't really matter, should have a job description. For the volunteers, you need to be really clear in terms of what are the roles and responsibilities for each volunteer.
Develop an annual meeting schedule. for board of directors, their time is really precious, and very often they commit way out, and so should the board. We know when the next year's Destin Charity Wine Auction board meetings are going to be, so that we can plan our schedule around it. And sometimes we say, whoops, I got a board meeting that night in November. And so you need to give a full annual meeting schedule to all the board members. Develop a meeting agenda. If you don't have an agenda, you'd be surprised how far off you can go. And when Joan and I got involved with the Destin Charity Wine Auction, some people say we were the founders. We were not. Some other people founded it. And we were asked after their first meeting, after their first auction, to join. And an average board meeting would last in excess of 4 hours.
Yeah, it was really bad.
And that's because we didn't have committees that were making decisions. It's because the board was doing everything. And I remember when I was at Hallmark, the expression of milking the mouse. Something that really is not very important, something that's fairly trivial. You'd be surprised how you could get 15 or 20 people taking their own time at milking that mouse, and what happens is it chews up time on the agenda. Keep accurate minutes so that you can refer to them, and most boards are using the recorders, the digital recorders, which are very inexpensive, and keep those for your own use. Conduct brief meetings. I don't know when your board meetings are. Some are during the day, oftentimes they're at night. But don't forget, many of the directors have had a full day of work, and the last thing you want to do is to put them to sleep in a board meeting, so keep them at brief and not 4 hours. Stimulate board participation. You want everybody in that board to participate. And one of the things you can do is to ask questions of board members. Jane, how does that feel to you? And so you can ask those questions. A good board member should be asking questions in exchange. They should be asking questions. Encourage them to ask questions. And that really helps to get a dialogue going, which can be very beneficial. As Joan had said, develop committee charters, make meaningful committee assignments. If it's somebody that enjoys meeting vintners, then they could be a great on the committee that selects and pulls in vintners to the organization. But have something that's of interest to the various board members. And it's important to recognize accomplishments in your busy lives, and you've got things going one right after another, and you got all sorts of things happening. It's pretty easy not to acknowledge people that are doing things, whether it be staff, whether it be board members. Certainly all of the participants of the organization should be recognized. And then set committee goals is really important. And a staff person should be connected to a committee, so each committee has a staff person. And use the action register. Actually, this is another thing I thank my partner for. When she joined my organization, she came up with this action register, and I hated it. I absolutely hated it because it had the project or whatever it was, and it's basically a project timeline. But if it was this project or this duty or whatever, there was a name next to it. It was going to be completed by this time, and these are the reporting intervals. What I didn't like about it is that she put my name in a whole bunch of those things that I had to respond to people on. But it made us more efficient. It made us more effective. Board operations and the structure, committees, officers, terms, composition, manual, orientation sessions, and I'm glad to hear some of you have already got orientation sessions and operations manual, and information systems.
I think that's you.
That's me.
Yep.
Okay. Frequency of meetings. Board operations should include frequency of meetings, length of the meetings, Consent agenda, who uses a consent agenda? Nobody.
Anybody know what a consent agenda is? Okay, go ahead.
It's simply a means of allowing the board to approve a whole list of items.
Exactly.
Okay, and so what might be typical is your previous board minutes, and there could be committee reports. Usually not budget, but sometimes budget. If the budget is all in line, there's nothing worth discussing, could be included in it. And so rather than going through each of those at the board meeting, they're all in the consent agenda, people have reviewed it ahead of time, there's a motion, a second, any discussion, approved. So you're getting a whole chunk of the business done at one time.
One of the things that should happen, though, in order to be a consent agenda, is that a board packet should go out to every board member prior to the board meeting so that they can read it and be fully
We
versed.
used to say 7 days by snail mail, but now we're saying 3 days
3
by
days.
email, so that people have a chance to review the material.
Consent agendas can be things, if it's fiscal and it's a decision to spend money, then it usually has to be something that is approved by the entire board. But if it's maybe housekeeping, or if it's structural things that are management of the structure, and so we're on budget to spend $1,000 and we were $950, and that could become a consent agenda because it's all expected and what was approved by the board when they constructed the budget. So a consent agenda can really increase the speed of a meeting, and it also allows the board members to have access to it in advance and say, well, wait a minute, what happened to the other thing that we're going to do in that project? And so you give the board the opportunity to go through this, and then when it comes up to a consent agenda, you approve the whole thing. Materials mailed in advance, emailed in advance.
Okay, committees. So we've talked a little bit about committees already and said your committee structure should support your strategic plan, which means you should be reviewing that as you go through your strategic planning process. In the bylaws, there can be standing committees, and you've got to be a little bit careful about that. You know, we looked at some bylaws of an organization recently, and literally they had 12 committees. They had an operations committee at the board level. No, that's not what boards do. They had a personnel committee. No, that's not what boards do. And so then we said, well, what if these committees are active? The executive committee and the finance committee. So only 2 of the 12 were active. A lot of them were out of date, and a couple of them were terribly inappropriate. So we sort of threw it all away and said, okay, here's your strategic plan. What do you really need to make things happen? Marketing committee, fundraising, finance, executive director, and a board effectiveness. We ended up with 5 committees that would really drive them where they needed to go. And so you need to review it. These were just made up. You know, we're saying 4 to 6 committees, sort of a nice number. Now you have to have board members to fill them and some non-board members. If you have less than 12 members on your board, that's probably too many committees. How many members can you have on your board? We've seen up to 25 or 30 effective members on the board only if it's a well-structured organization with very active committees. It doesn't work if it's not well-structured and that committees have charters and they have certain authority. So those might be some committees to think about. Frequency of meeting depends on the work that they need to get done. And so there are some committees, like in our case, marketing committee is really busy every year, starting in about May through the early part of the fall, because they're putting together the annual report, all our marketing materials for the year. They're identifying all of the media outlets where we want to get out the message in terms of what we accomplished last year and what we're proposing to accomplish this year. And so they have a lot they have to do in a short period of time. So they may be meeting more than once a month during those months, and then once we get into the fall, maybe meeting once a month after that. So each committee is going to have a different meeting schedule based on the work that they need to get done. There should be some kind of staff support for committees. For instance, if you have an events committee at the board level, do you have an events person on staff that can be the conduit? They're a non-voting member of that committee, but they are making sure that all the events are coordinated at the board and the staff level. Same thing with fundraising, same thing with procurement or whatever other committee there might be. There should be some staff linkage.
Okay, if I can just interject, since that was my second. One of the things that's really good about us is we oftentimes wander and go off to different tangents. And I forgot that was my section, Phyllis. Thank you for covering me. But I have a question. Should there be a personnel committee? Did you?
Yeah, personnel and operations at the meeting.
Okay. The real problem is that sometimes in various boards, they want to become more involved in the operations of the organization. That cannot happen. You need to be strategic and you need to be policy driven. And they can supervise the executive director, but not to be involved in the operations.
They should not be giving any supervisory direction to a staff person. And they have to be very careful, board members, of socializing these staff members. We worked with a nonprofit where there was a board member dating a staff member. That is a conflict of interest. That is not good stuff.
This is very bad.
Okay, so executive committee. How many of you have an executive committee? Okay, if you have one, is it just the officers of the organization? If so, raise your hand. Okay, anybody have other members at large that are put on the executive committee? I think executive committees are important, and sort of the role and function is extremely important. It's probably most common that it's the officers of the organization. Typical officers that we see, sometimes they have a little bit different names, but we usually have a chair-elect, a chair, and a past chair, treasurer, and secretary. That's typical that we see of officers. We ran into some nonprofits in our Leaders Edge class where they have people progress through all of those positions to become chair and past chair. I think not a good idea, because when you get to treasurer, you want somebody who really understands finances of nonprofits. And so a person who's a good secretary may not be a good treasurer. And a good treasurer may not be a good chair. And so typically we see the progression of chair-elect, chair, and past chair working well, and then separate functions, the secretary and the treasurer. So they are on the executive committee. And they're responsible for the strategic direction and legal compliance oversight. They're making sure that that organization is on the road and stays on the road. They can exercise any and all powers of the board of directors between board meetings. They keep the bylaws updated. Sometimes there's a separate bylaw committee, but usually the bylaws are updated only every other, every third, every fifth year. And so for a standing committee, it doesn't really make sense. So it might fit in the executive committee, or it can be a form and full committee. So when we have to do bylaw review, we form a committee, we do bylaw review, they make recommendations to the board, we vote on the changes, and then that folds, that committee folds. Deals with conflict of interest and confidentiality. If there is an issue, the executive director has heard that there was a staff member, or well, a board member, who in the community was acting inappropriately and not representing you well. There was one that we heard of recently, and it had something to do with too much alcohol and dancing on a table. But unfortunately, at the time, they had the name of the nonprofit on them. That is a problem. It is awkward for the executive director to have that conversation. In fact, it's inappropriate. That is where the board chair comes in, or somebody else from this executive committee. They need to have a sit down and say, hey, I know that you're passionate about a mission. We want you to serve as an ambassador. In this particular situation, maybe you were celebrating something special, but you weren't representing us in the light that we want to be represented in the community. So can you sort of not do that in the future? Performs annual performance review of the executive director. How many of you that are executive directors get an annual performance review? so it's not 100%. I think it's really important that boards do an annual performance review. Extremely important. Executive directors need and deserve to get feedback. They cannot improve their performance without feedback. They also need to be recognized for the great things that they do. Because I understand that they are not paid market value for all the work that they do. That being the case, this is the opportunity to have that sit-down discussion and talk about things that went extremely well, the talents and gifts and contributions that executive director has made, but also talk about, in the next year, it'd be great to see it grow in this area. I know it's really hard for you to do the ask when you're out in the community. How can we help you get more comfortable with that? Or whatever area it is that you want that person to develop in. That is the responsibility of the executive committee, and hopefully also to be able to give some kind of grades. Most organizations do. If we're going through a really bad recession and revenues are down, even private enterprises may do a salary freeze for a year. But it's hard to retain good talent without recognizing them both verbally as well as some kind of financial recognition and contribution those people make.
There's one other thing that I would put on the executive committee, and we already talked about it, but succession planning. That executive committee should be talking about successors to the executive director. Not that any of you are an endangered species, but anybody could be hit by a bus. And I was with a $1 million organization, $1 million budget in Kansas City, and the executive director left. And we were caught flat-footed. Didn't have any candidates, and it was part of a national organization, and so we recruited nationally. And it took us almost 5 months to replace that person. And during that time, the chairperson of the board was doing far too much and probably not doing it very well with the organization, with the agency. And really, what was impacted, in this case it was kids, the job didn't get done. It didn't get done as well as it should have. And so the executive committee should be thinking about succession planning all the time. Not just within your own organization, but okay, so who else in the national spectrum, if it's a national agency, has come to surface that could be a potential success?
I would add to that, I did some consulting with a large nonprofit, probably budget of about $300 million in Kansas City, and the board knew that they were up against some succession planning, so they hired me to help them with that whole process. And we went through that process and we looked at external candidates and internal candidates, identified an internal candidate, extremely high performer, very effective guy, in his mid-40s to take over as CEO. So, job done, right? He, unfortunately, now is extremely ill at Mayo Clinic. He's on medical leave, still in his 40s. And guess what? They have no success because the job was done. So it's not based on age. We don't know what's going to happen in this life. And so every board should be having that conversation about, if this happened tomorrow, what would we do? Do we have internal candidates? Are we grooming them? Are there external candidates? What would we do in the event that tomorrow this position came open?
Actually, I'm surprised nobody dropped their mouth open when Joan said annual budget of $300 million. That's $300 million.
Oh, that's a billion?
No, you said million.
Oh,
right?
million, yeah.
How many organizations here have a budget of $300 million? Not too many. And this was a research nonprofit, so it was a research organization.
Go ahead. You had a question?
I'm curious about what you see the role of the secretary of the board being, because I don't know about other nonprofits here, but unfortunately, in my opinion, we have a staff member who attends board meetings and takes the minutes, and then the secretary reviews them, and they officially go out through her.
Okay. I think that's typical. The secretary in the old days, it would be the woman on the board. Oh, let's make her secretary, and she would take notes. Now we have staff members that are backing it up, and they've got the audio version of it and so forth. But it is the responsibility of the secretary to make sure that the minutes are accurate and that they are kept in a safe place. They also are usually responsible for helping a staff person get out the board packets emailed out 3 days in advance. So they're helping with all of that piece. But I think, as we listen to it, yes, you can depend on a staff person for part of that. But the secretary of the board needs to make sure that the minutes are accurate and they are kept in a safe place. The worst case is, there's a fire and you lose all your minutes, or there's no backup to the computer and somehow the computer crashes and it has all of your minutes. So you need to have those conversations, and it's more almost a risk management conversation on how do we keep our records safe. Okay, so Finance Committee reviews financial budget and audit, and you did hear me say that the person who heads up this committee really needs to be very knowledgeable about finances for the nonprofit sector. They need to understand 990s. They need to understand transparency. They need to understand budgeting, that whole process. They need to understand your accounting system. And they are the go-between between your nonprofit and whatever external accounting firm you're using for your financials or your audit. They need to present appropriate financial reports to be able to answer the questions on those financials that the board might ask, transparency, 990s, and maybe even make investment decisions. Pretty important, should be more than one person. We don't want any one person handling all of your financials. You always want everything doubled. You do an event, some kind of fundraising event, and you've got a volunteer collecting money, not one person, two. Always double. You always want 2 eyes on every dollar. You need that balance to make sure that funds don't get misappropriated. It's easy to take out that $100 and put it in your pocket. Okay? Fundraising committee. With the current climate, most nonprofits can benefit from this committee. Most nonprofits today don't have this committee, or at least they don't have a committee like this that's functioning effectively. It needs to be chaired by somebody who totally gets it. Either they've done effective fundraising in the past, or they're a salesperson that they're willing to be trained. This is an area of board development. A lot of boards don't know how to do this effectively, so they don't know how to put together the plan. Like, what percent of our time should be individual ask versus getting corporate sponsorship versus writing grants versus going after government money? What does our pie look like? And how do we get that work done? What is being done by the executive director versus the board versus the staff? So putting together a comprehensive fundraising plan makes sense. We are trying to, there's a fundraising consulting firm that is the #1 around the globe by the name of HeartSer. We happen to know the CEO of HeartSer, Matt Bean. He's a good friend to have. So we have brought him into Fort Walton the last 3 years to work with our Leaders Edge class and really try to educate them a little bit about fundraising. We now are seeing nonprofits in the area hiring him for a board retreat to put together their comprehensive fundraising plan. It's dollars. You don't have extra dollars in your budget, but these are dollars where there's a return on the investment. You may spend, and I don't know what Mac charges, I think it depends on if he has 2 gigs back to back, but $3,000 to $5,000 for a day. But if that plan allows you to raise $250,000 that you wouldn't have otherwise, so his job is to help you put together the plan that makes sense for you, but then also get your board comfortable with their role in executing it. So I'm not part of his marketing committee. I'm just saying that our experience, most boards do not know how to do this well, and they may need a little development in this area, and it might be worth the dollars that you spend on it, because you should be able then to raise more funds.
Yeah, I don't want to give them a boost either, but I was involved in Angel Flight Central, and it was a great organization. People were in need for medical assistance. However, we ran a very lean organization, one employee, and one of the board meetings we were really low on cash. Well, we didn't have any cash, and so we had to go into our pocket and come up with checks.
Payroll.
And so we could make a payroll for this one person. And, one thing that came out of that meeting was, this isn't going to work for long. This is not a long-term process where we can survive and the organization can sustain itself. And so we actually did engage this organization. Don't want to give that up as a marketing, but with their guidance, we got to having an $800,000 endowment. And so even when you think it's changing, and there are different ways to ask for money. And I've had some, and I do ask for money. And so often I get, would you consider? I say, would you consider a sponsorship of the Destin Charity Wine Auction? Well, yes, of course. And it's like, what do I need to do to get you to give? And he said, ask me. And so often people are ready to support. And by the way, you're all having funding challenges and changes in this time we're in. And people know that. And so there are people that are very willing to participate with your organization, but they just need to be asked.
So 70% of all philanthropic dollars in the United States come from where? Individuals. And not big amounts. 25, 50, 100. Adopt a flight, what's it, $350?
$350.
Whatever it is. 70% of the dollars come from individuals. People think it's the big foundations, it's the grants, it's the government, but it's really individual assets. There's a lot of research. I don't know what the national organization is, the Council on Philanthropy in Kansas City, about philanthropy, and they've looked at fundraising, and they look at what is the cost of you doing something to raise funds, and then you raise the dollars, and what percent of those funds actually end up on the bottom line. And so everybody likes to do these events. You hear that we raised 1.2 million in 3 hours. So, let's do that. We could raise 1.2 million. Events, only about 50% of the dollars end up on the bottom line. Even a good event. Whereas a letter of solicitation for an individual ask, about 95% of the dollars end up on the bottom line. Most organizations can only do 1 or 2 big events a year. It takes a lot of staff time. It takes a lot of board time. We know a lot of nonprofits that are trying to do 8, 10 events a year. And some of those events, they're netting only like $1,500. But it's eating up huge amounts of staff time and board time. So you have to be strategic about your fundraising plan and figure out, okay, you need to raise this many dollars. How are we going to get there? What makes the most sense to us?
I have to tell you that when I was at Hallmark, everybody was expected to give to the United Way. And so I got Andrea a reaction back there. She's now tuned in to me. She's heard some of this before. And so, and when I got into my own business, I was too involved in really Angel Flight. I was very involved in Angel Flight and just building the business and surviving and sustaining myself. And so remember that advisor that asked me the question, why? And rather caustic guy, actually. He came to me and he said, your organization is not participating in the United Way. And I said, yeah, but we're junior achievement, we're this and we're that. And he said, don't you understand? Things are changing. The big companies used to support United Way. And that's changing now. It's up to the smaller companies. You're a smaller company, you better start participating. And so we started participating in the United Way in Kansas City, and we're acknowledged for being that participant in the United Way. But what it really taught me is things are all changing. And they were changing 10 or 15 years ago, but they're changing even faster now. And so we have to come up with new ideas, new approaches to making our organization sustainable.
Events committee. Sometimes events are handled by staff. If you are doing events and your staff is sort of plates full, an events committee at the board level can be effective, but then they have to sort of take it all on. So remember how I talked about really great characteristics of board members are that They are prepared, they're planful, and the follow through. So you only want to send by somebody who's really organized and really accountable and good at follow through. But they should be responsible for marketing that event, sort of planning the whole agenda for that event. They should be looking for volunteers and training those volunteers and supervising those volunteers for the event. They need to be there to oversee that the event goes smoothly. They need to be prepared to do cleanup. Sometimes they sort of say, wow, that was a great event. I'm exhausted. I'm going home. No, they have to do the cleanup and then afterwards the post-mortem. So getting together the people on that committee and staff, if they've been involved, and say what went really well, what didn't go so well. Are we going to do this event next year? How would we improve on it if we're going to do it again? Volunteer committee. We don't have enough staff, so one effective way of trying to get more work done is having a really good volunteers committee. Again, we talked a little bit about having job descriptions for those volunteers. It's being able to recruit them. It's being able to train them, supervise them, and then recognize them. So some kind of recognition. It's also keeping a donor database, a volunteer database on terms of what volunteers do we have, what kinds of work are they interested in doing, what is their availability or commitment from a time standpoint, so that as a need comes up, we can go into that database and find good volunteers for whatever needs to get done. And board development committee. We've already talked a little bit about this. We're proponents of this. Rather than having just a nominations committee, make it a board development committee. So those folks recruit board members. They're part of the orientation process of new board members, but they're also involved in doing board development. We've already talked about that, and also board evaluation. We can't improve unless we really are assessing where are we strong, where are we weak. Do we have a goal in terms of board development over the course of the next year?
Okay, the various offices of the board, I'll go through this really quickly, but the board chairperson is a pretty doggone important position. And when you're recruiting board members, if you look for the warm body, you're going to get a warm body, and they won't participate and won't constructively help the organization grow and get stronger. Board chairperson is critical. You need somebody that's a leader. It's somebody that's going to really lead the executive committee, and as well as supervising you guys, the executive directors. Serves as a member of all committees, recommends who will serve on committees, appoints committee chairs, prepares board agenda along with the executive director, conducts new board member orientations. That is so important because when the board chair is there and the board orientation, it really makes it worthwhile for that new board member. By the way, one of the great things in the board orientation, we have this tendency to go on the sides here, but it's to have a board orientation, and after the board orientation have a social for the entire board. And maybe it's in conjunction with a board meeting, but I really like the idea of introducing the new board member or members to the other board members, so that there's an esprit de corps that comes up, and they start to get contagiously infected with the board mission. The vice chairperson, boy, this is your successor for the board chair. And that board chair may rotate off, or they may step down and become something else. Usually after being board chair, they'll rotate off. Board chairperson attending all meetings, serves on the executive committee. This is the person that's going to go into that chairman's role. Carries out special assignments. We talked about the board secretary with the help of staff. We don't need the board secretary to take down all the notes, but we do need that board secretary to make sure that what is being recorded is correct. And that's why I say those digital recorders that aren't very expensive now would be really valuable. Obviously, the board secretary can be very effective if they don't attend the meetings. Serves on the executive committee, maintains board records and ensures accuracy and safety. That safety thing is really important. I know none of your facilities will ever burn down, but it can happen. And even if it didn't burn down, water damage could damage records. So make sure they're kept in a separate area. Anybody have that where minutes and things were compromised? Tell me about it.
Well, we had a lovely office on the water when Hurricane Ivan came in. We had 4 feet of water on the bottom floor. Now, those records can actually be recovered. They freeze the paper and they suck the water out, and you can actually get stuff back. But it smells like hell. It's possible. A fire, obviously, we couldn't recover the record.
Well, you know, that's a great example. Even getting all the data back, even if it smells, but the cost of doing it is a compromise to the organization. So think in terms of safety and or maybe even duplications. Okay. The secretary should be the one that's emailing all of the advance packets to the board members. The board treasurer, really important position. It should be somebody that has financial acumen. It does not necessarily have to be an accountant at all, but it should be somebody that understands financials and the backbone to the financials. Not just enough to look at the P&L statement and say, hey, we're not broke, so it's good. But you need to understand and have the acumen to go in and ask questions. Exactly why is that expenditure like that? And so financial acumen is really important. Serves as the chief financial officer of the organization. Very often is the person that signs the 990s. Manages financial responsibilities. Ensures appropriate financial reports, which means, hey, listen, I've seen some nonprofits that have financial reports that, where did this come from? I mean, it doesn't make sense. It doesn't add up. It doesn't have a line going from place to place. Oversees and reviews the audit process. Do all of you get audited every year? Some bylaws and some organizations, some agencies require independent audits of your organization. And obviously the 990s and this one here, ensuring the financial transparency. Boy, that didn't used to be as significant as it is now. Very often, if you're going for a donation, and especially to a foundation, they will really want to see your finances, and they will want to understand the dynamics and what's working and what isn't working. And so having that transparency is really important for the community and for your organization's sustainability.
We're going to talk a little bit about board terms, but before we get started, what is the board terms that you guys have for your board? 2 years? And can people have a second 2-year term? Okay. And do you have a chair-elect, chair, and past chair?
We are lucky to have a chair.
Okay, somebody else? Your board term? Okay.
We have 3 2-year terms.
3 2-year terms. Okay. We're seeing more and more boards going for a 3-year term, and part of that is chair-elect, chair, past chair, and that you can go for 2 3-year terms. So you're not going to become chair-elect probably your first 3-year term. So you've got 3 years in there, and then you can go through that progression. Now, you don't have to serve 2 3-year terms. Your commitment is a 3-year term. But if you're really engaged and excellent and whatever, you could have that second. And then you have to rotate off. And some have you rotate off forevermore, and some have you rotate off for a minimum of 1 or 2 years. And then you can be re-elected if the board so chooses and you so choose. So we're seeing 3-year terms becoming more and more common, having a second 3-year term, and then you have to rotate off. One of the tricks with that is making sure that not everybody's rotating off at the same time. So you want to stagger the terms. So if you're just getting organized or you're just instituting a 3-year term, you have a third of the board say, you're in your first year of 3-year term, a third of the board, you're in your second year of your 3-year term, and a third of the board, you're in the third year of your 3-year term. That is protecting the sustainability and the knowledge of the organization, where you're not having a large number of board members leaving at the same time. Some boards have a mandatory retirement age. Now, we brought this up at a training that we did last fall, and there was a group of individuals at one table. In fact, it probably constituted a large portion of their board. I would guess just visually that the youngest person was 70 plus. And they objected to this. They said, if we had a mandatory retirement age, there'd be no one left on the board. And thank goodness someone else spoke up and I didn't have to say a word because I wasn't quite sure how I was going to handle that one. And somebody said, then you have not built a sustainable organization. You are at risk. You need to bring in younger people, get them schooled in what it is that you do so that you have people of all different ages and you're not at risk at that whole board either retiring or getting ill or whatever. We did in Leaders Edge a couple years ago. A lot of the founders of that organization that were passionate about it were still on the board. The organization was over 20 years old. So there were several board members that were over 80 on the board. Now there are people in their 80s that are fantastic. They're bright, intelligent, totally engaged. So this isn't always age related. Their problem is they had 2 founding board members that had dementia. And so what the executive director would do is call them on the day of the board meeting to remind them. Now, they might remember from that call till the actual start of the board meeting to get to the board meeting, or they might get lost on the way. It was about a 50-50 shot that these 2 board members could make it to the board meeting even when they were called that day. Neither of them used computers. And so everything had to be communicated snail mail, handwritten, and it had become a burden. They were not contributing to the board any longer. Now, I know my grandfather died of Alzheimer's in his 40s, so this is not all age related, but it gets awkward if there is no retirement age or any discussion about that, and then you have somebody who has been passionate, they have given their heart and soul, they've given dollars, they've been on your board 20 plus years, and now they're unable to contribute, and what do you do with them? It becomes really, really delicate and awkward. So we're saying that there's no magic bullet here, but some boards are saying, okay, we're gonna say 70 or 75 is sort of our retirement age on the board. You just have to have the discussion. I think it's important. Go ahead.
Making like a member emeritus or something, especially if they were a founding member.
Absolutely.
And they were not kicked off because elevated.
The Pope is doing that, you know, and I think it's Pope Emeritus, and so I think that is a good model. I think you can also say, hey, we're wanting to build a board of trustees or an advisory board, a little bit different commitment. You know, you're only going to meet once a year and sort of figure out if you can help us with this breakfast event that we do every year. So you don't have a regular meeting schedule, but we need somebody to really lead that effort. Would you be willing to be the first person who is on our board of trustees or advisory board to help us get it organized? So there could be another role too, that it's not a monthly board meeting kind of thing that might fit that person. Just depends.
You know, sometimes it's very good to have a historian for the ancients. You can get some of the historical events to where we got to today. And so having an emeritus person could fill that role as a historian. You know, boards are very, very important. And sometimes I've heard nonprofit executive directors say, well, we have to have a board, and we have to do this and that. And you know, that's not the right attitude. Companies, public companies have boards of directors. And you know, there's a company today that's having an election of the board of directors. Pretty important election. And is anybody aware of that? It's a very popular company. And the election, now there's another item on the agenda for the voters, which are all of the stockholders, or the big blocks of stockholders, and they're going to elect the board of directors. And I suspect the board, each board member gets probably about $250,000 a year for serving on that board, and it happens to be Apple. And so now, if this is voted in, that there has to be a certain minimum number of votes for a person to be on that board. And all of the directors in Apple are up for re-election. 2 members of that board, a lady which I didn't recognize, but a guy I did recognize, didn't get the minimum votes last year to be on the board. And that board of director, his name was Al Gore. And so if he doesn't get more than that this year, he may not get reelected. Well, $250,000 can get, some interest from a lot of people. I'd join that board. But, the fact of the matter is, don't treat your board casually. This is really important. It's not getting warm bodies to give occasional direction. This is really an important functioning organization that can really lead to the success and greater success of an organization. In your packet, you'll have a composition form, and if there's a well-functioning organization and a well-functioning board, you will have diversity within that board. A strong board is a diversified board. It should reflect the community. It should reflect the mission of the business. And so this is a matrix that is a little different than this one here, but essentially looking for a well-diversified organization that brings various skills and talents to the board. Like I say, you don't need an attorney in there to do your legal work. You need an attorney in there to say, wait a minute, I'm not sure that passes the sniff test. That doesn't seem correct to me. And you want an accountant in there to do the same sort of thing. You want a business leader in there that can say, hey, we want to grow this organization. And you want a marketing person in there to say, okay, we're doing this now. Imagine if we could do this. And so getting people that can inspire and help that organization thrive, not just sustain itself, but to thrive and become even more successful.
Board manual. Do you all have a board manual? Okay, so it looks like some of you do, some of you don't. I think they're important, and they're a tool used in 2 different ways. One, for new board members as an orientation. And you actually use it and go through it during that orientation session. Number 2, I think it's a really good tool for existing board members, because you're in the middle of a board meeting and somebody says bylaws. I can't remember in our bylaws if it's two-year term, you flip, everybody sees it, everybody's on the same page. I think it's important that the information in there is only the critical information that they're going to use on a really regular basis. Somebody, executive director, showed me her board manual. It was that thick, well, nobody could find anything in it. It was just too much information. So you want the information to be pertinent, you want it to be concise, you want it to be dated. Because, you're going to have a list of, let's say, board of directors and their contact information, their staff and their phone numbers. Well, that changes. And so as it's updated, it's dated. You take out the old one, you put in the new one, rather than just keep piling it along. Some typical information in a board manual. Stephen, next slide. The history, legal structure. Now, you don't need all of this, but these are some ideas. Bylaws, mission, vision, values, strategic and execution plans, annual goals, organizational overview, organizational structure and location, staff roster, an organizational chart. And next slide. Board member expectations can be in there, committee charters, goals, calendar of board and committee meetings, list of board members, titles, contact information, description of D&O insurance.
Oh, How many
of you
have the
have
D&O
D&O
insurance?
Yay! If you don't have it, please get it. Not expensive. $1,000, $1,200, it's important. It's gonna be hard to recruit really, really great board members without it in this day and age.
I would not serve on a board if it didn't have D&O insurance.
So anyway, look at it.
Very inexpensive.
Um,
Yeah, everybody knows what D&O insurance is?
Director and officer. Current financial statements, often they'll have the budget, most recent audit, fundraising events, list of donors. So those are some things that might go in there. I think we did that slide.
That's going too fast.
And then these are some other things that might be in there. You know, board and committee minutes, the annual report, selected press releases, some marketing materials. I just listed a whole lot of stuff. You just need to figure out what is the most critical for your board members and have it organized in a way that it's easy, you know, using tabs where they can click and find the bylaws easily. So the information that they're going to use on a regular basis, make it pertinent, make it concise, date it, and then update it on a regular basis.
I have never found a well-organized or well-functioning nonprofit without a good orientation for board of directors. Simply doesn't happen. You get old boys club or the old girls club, and you don't get a well-functioning organization. The session is for new board members. Should be led by the chair. Should be provide orientation to utilizing the board's manual. Follow reception. I like the reception. I really think, boy, if you can get people involved and get the other board members there and talk about some of the successes of the organization, I think that social is really important. 10 minutes. Okay. We should have in there the history, mission, vision, strategic plan.
Well, this is actually for the board orientation session. These are some of the things that you can review during that session. As I said before, it's great to have at least the board chair and the executive director, sometimes the whole executive committee. So these are some of the things that you might want to just go through. It's making them smart, giving them a leg up. Also asking the question, do you want a board buddy? And a board buddy is a more experienced board member that will sit next to them, sort of answer their questions, maybe meet with them for breakfast, you know, the first couple months they serve on the board, or maybe meet directly after the meeting and just quickly ask any questions, any gaps in terms of our discussion today. Oh yeah, they were talking about that event you did a couple of years ago. Tell me more about that. And they talked about when you guys ran into a problem with this. What happened there? And so board buddy can be helpful in really getting someone up to speed quickly.
You know, this is the board orientation, but one thing we have missing, and it's the mission moment. I think if you're going to have a board orientation, having a mission moment with somebody that you're providing services for, a story about the situation, can be very inspiring to get that person contagiously infected with the passion of the mission. Because that's the one job that you all have, is to really infect those new people with the passion of the business. What you do, some of the success stories, and it can tug the heart. No matter what your organization does, it can tug the heart of people that are connected and interested.
Board information systems, there's really three types of information. One is decision information, so it's really used to make decisions. And it might be that you are considering a new facility or a new service, and it's really looking at, okay, what market research have we done to see if this facility is really needed in Okaloosa County or whatever county it might be. And, you know, what is it going to cost us and what is our budget, how are we going to raise that money? It's all that information that the board members need in order to make a good decision. So it's going to be used decision by decision. I think you have to back up. And then there's monitoring information, and the monitoring information is really seeing, are we on track? So it could be that action plan or execution plan on what we said by what date, where we at. It could be our annual goals and our metrics and how we're doing against those goals. It could be our proposed budget versus our actuals. Are we on track in terms of budget? So that's all monitoring information. Incidental information. Okay, so one of you heard about this great thing that a nonprofit is doing in another community. It's bringing that information to the board. It's somebody went through some social media marketing training in New York and is bringing that information to the board. So it's information that is used to try to make everybody a little more knowledgeable on the board. So those are the kinds of information that are typical for boards.
Now, Joan told me to pick up the pace, and when she says pick up the pace, I'm there, I'm moving ahead fast.
So all this information, again, concise, it's got to be pertinent, meaningful, timely, it has to be relevant. So there could be some information that's on social media marketing. Well, maybe not everybody on the board needs to hear it, maybe only the marketing committee needs to hear it. So you have to decide who really is going to benefit from learning from this information. Also, doing everything in handwritten reports versus charts. Charts are easier to read, quicker, people can absorb the information and see if you're on track or not on track quicker.
Okay, I get a chance to talk about the ideal board member, the profile, passionate about the organization's mission. You've only heard us say that about 25 times, and it's true. If you don't get that passion out there, you're not going to have a person committed to the organization, or willing to take time away from the family, or willing to take time away from their independent activities. So passion drives it all. Knowledge about the organization, attends at least 75% of the meetings. If that isn't in your bylaws, it should be in the bylaws. And
Any of you have that? Have a certain percent? Is it 75 or some other number?
I think there's just a set number, if they miss more than that.
3 in a
Subject
row of
to being-
unexcused
yeah.
absence.
Yeah, and so often I've heard that, this board member has missed those, but nobody addresses it. And so if you don't address it, then you are compromising your bylaws. And so then you have a person that's really abusing it, and you haven't set a standard. And because of that lack of a standard, then the person is going to continue to do that. So you need to make sure you address those attendance standards. Come to board meetings prepared. I've seen people that are really unprepared at board meetings. I bet none of you have, but I have seen a lot of poorly prepared people. One committee, 75% of the meetings, and respects confidentiality.
Those conflicts of interest. I was doing some work with the hospital board, and they had a banker on that board, and the board was deciding where to put their funds, and the banker did not recuse himself. That's the issue.
Makes a personal financial donation. Say, I understand that everybody has some limitations, and you can't put a person in a board member and expect them to make a $50,000 contribution. What you can do is expect some level of commitment. And maybe it's, to their capacity, it's $25, or maybe it's $10, or maybe it's $2,500. It doesn't matter. If you're applying for grants nowadays, most of those grants will say what percentage of your board participates in financially supporting the organization. It doesn't say how much, but it does participate. And if you say 50%, I can assure you that you probably won't get that grant. They want to see a committed organization, a committed board. Agrees with, to help with the execution plan, acts as an ambassador. If you have a mission statement that's 2 paragraphs long, more than likely that ambassador, that board member, when he gets in the elevator, they say, well, what do you do? I can't remember the 2 paragraphs. What was it that was said? So you might think about your mission. Is it short, concise? Is it memorable? Does everybody remember? Can everybody passionately talk about what you do and how it makes a difference in our community? And we talked about development of financial resources. Now, that participates is really important because it doesn't mean that you have a board member that's just doing that by themselves. They can be partners as they go out to talk about your organization and participates in donor calls. serves as a resource at special events, attends special events, recruits future members, and commits to a 3-year term, evaluates their own performance.
What we have seen is that boards will sometimes take that list and modify it to work for them. Maybe your term limit is 2 years versus 3 years, and take it back and say, hey, we went through this crazy Carter Board Effectiveness training thing, but they have this, ideal board member or board member expectation list. Can we look at it and sort of see what fits for us and go through and modify so that you end up with a board expectation list that fits for your organization? So we really recommend you taking that step and trying to develop that, something that really fits for you.
Now, before Joan talks about Robert's Rules of Order and how many of you are familiar with it, Robert's Rules of Order is basically how you operate a meeting. And I'm going to tell you that you may have heard the story. So if you have heard the story, I'll probably tell it anyway. But I was living in New Fairfield, Connecticut, and I was appointed to the Planning Commission, which was a political organization. And a lot of people, all of a sudden, within the first month or two, I was a young guy, all of a sudden in the first month or two, I was chairperson of the committee, of the Planning Commission. And there was a lot of development going on in the town, and there was a lot of friction, and there was a lot of everything. And I have no idea why I was all of a sudden the chairperson of the committee, that I didn't have the faintest clue as to how to operate. And one of the meetings, which had a large public following, something, and I don't remember the exact order of what I did, but in the back of the room, a person raised their hand and said, "Mr. Chairman, that's out of order." And so I had not a clue as to what I had done wrong. But don't get caught in that situation where you're out of order and you don't have a clue as to what you did wrong. In those days it was a thinner pamphlet, and I figured it out. But being Robert's Rules of Order is not the most exciting thing. It's going to keep you awake right before you go to sleep. And so what you want to do is to understand it, know what you need to do out of that Robert's Rules of Order.
Now, we sometimes get evaluation forms that say, I need more training on Robert's Rules of Order. You need to recognize that that could be a half day or full day session, and that is not our purpose here. And we have shared with Andrea, there is now a training program that we did create at Northwest Florida State College. In fact, I think they did it either today or yesterday. Robert's Rules of Order, Bob and Lori Gilardi, friends of ours, put it on. And it will be offered again next fall. And if you want that program brought to Pensacola, I think we can arrange for it to be brought. So I'm giving you that right now because this is going to be just a quick overview on Robert's Rules of Order. Why do you use it? It provides you some structure and makes sure that every voice gets heard. There is an order that things get done. It helps everybody understand what the motion was, what the second to that motion, what the discussion was, and what decision was made. So when you leave that board meeting, you're pretty clear on what just happened. It's much easier for the secretary to capture what is going on when you use Robert's Rules of Order. Now, before I put this together, I bought the new Concise Revised. The Concise book is about that big, written by the grandson. And I was like, really? So it gets pretty deep and pretty hairy. But I believe in my heart of hearts that at least the chairperson and the executive director and some people on the board need to be familiar enough with it. What we're seeing is that smaller nonprofits are adopting some of the basic structure, but not every rule. So they will have a motion made, and it does tell you what a motion looks like. The second, they'll have the discussion, they'll have the vote. Sometimes motions get tabled for various reasons. So it gives you that process or procedures necessary, makes clear what the chairperson's role is. All of that's really valuable, and it really helps everybody understand what was decided, because you end up with a vote on that motion that's been seconded, and everybody's clear on what just happened. So probably worth getting the book, but for sure chair people need to be familiar with it, and enough people on the board that we've got some structure and process that makes the meetings go smoother and better, and everybody is clear on what just happened.
I think, Andrea, I heard her just saying now, I can't believe that Steve Carter didn't follow Robert's Rules of Order. Having heard me speak in a number of different classes and sessions, I bet you always thought I followed the procedure.
We promised you a non-profit panel of executive directors, and we have 3 individuals today. We have John Clark, who's the CEO of Council on Aging, Dr. Sherry White, who is the CEO of United Cerebral Palsy, my first employer, by the way, and Paula Schell, who's executive director of Big Brothers and Big Sisters, and they're going to come up here, and each of them is going to do a 5-minute presentation, and in that 5 minutes, they're going to cover 3 things. What their expectations are of board members, their thoughts of what makes boards effective, and their need for future board members, including desired knowledge, skills, and experiences. So they each will speak for 5 minutes. They're all high performing, so I'm sure they'll keep to their 5 minutes. Otherwise, we're going to
we asked
time
them if they would come up on a panel together, and we were going to, I did it wrong, guys. So when they were asked to come today, I told them we would be asking them the questions on the panel.
We
So
will
could
do
we
that.
just-
We will do that.
Because they may revolt against me.
Okay, so what, that's okay. So we're going to do that after they each make a 5 minutes presentation. We'll ask the questions, then we're going to open up. We're going to get you out on time too. So Paula, do your post-test, so don't leave if you need your CFRE. Paula, what are your expectations of board members?
My expectation for board members is individuals that are going to be part of my team, that believe in the mission of Big Brothers Big Sisters, and that can help me, can open doors in the community. I can't be everywhere, so I rely on them to open doors, help me make connections, and are going to help further the mission of my agency.
Great. And what do you think makes boards effective?
I think a very cohesive unit and team. I think that an effective board is one that understands the mission. I came in on the tail end of you talking about the orientation for a board member, and that is so critical that they already know about your organization when they start and get on your board, so that they're already up to speed that very first board meeting, and they understand your lingo, your terminology, and things like that. So I just think that a board that is also passionate about what you do and can help you in the community spread the word about what you're doing with your agency and your service.
Great. And Paula, are you currently recruiting board members?
Absolutely.
And what are you looking for from a knowledge, skill, or experience standpoint?
Currently, right now, our need is marketing, somebody with some experience in marketing. We are looking for a finance area as well. So, and legal.
Perfect. Thank you. Dr. Sherry White, welcome.
Thank you.
First of all, what is it that you expect of board members?
What I call the 2 E's. One is ethics, to be ethical, and the other one is to be engaged. And if they're single, that's okay. No, I'm engaged. And it's those are 2 very important components, and then we can tackle any of the other needs by orientation and giving them some time to learn what we need and learn about the organization.
And what are your thoughts on what makes a board effective?
What makes a board effective, again, is that they come to meetings, they're involved, they fundraise, they talk up the organization.
And are you currently recruiting board members?
Currently, I am not. We have a waiting list for board members to come on our board.
For you.
Yeah.
You might want to meet with her and figure out how she did that.
know what your cast off.
Great.
So, not to sound, arrogant or anything, but we do have a wait list, and because we have some wonderful board members. I think that you guys heard from one of my board members this morning, Buzz Ritchie. He is on my board and has been, and I have a little bit different thoughts on term limits and things like that, but he was a state legislator, and even while he was serving in that capacity, he was on my board of directors, which was extremely advantageous for the public policy piece of individuals with developmental disabilities in Tallahassee.
That's great. John Clark, welcome.
Thank you.
First of all, tell me what you expect of board members.
Well, we like younger board members, but of course, since at my age, anybody 50 and under is younger. So we could be somewhat flexible on that. But I would ditto everything they said, but two things that I look for, in addition, that we look for on our board. We have a 30-member board, and it can go up or down depending on how many people are nominated and how many people agree to serve. I would agree with everything that Sherry and Paula said, ethics, advocacy, fundraising, so forth. We do require our board members to sign a financial commitment, and we specify an amount, a minimum amount, and then a maximum amount that we expect them to either give or get during the year. But we also, because so much of our money is federal and state money, I need a board member that's, in addition to having some of those skills, is also connected in the community and has the backbone to stand up and represent my agency legislatively if need be, and that takes courage. It really does take courage, and not all the movers and shakers in town have that courage to do that because they don't want to step out front. And over the years, we've had some very hot issues with legislation that we've needed that, and we've had it, And I think that's one way, I could say we were blessed that at that time we had that leadership that would do that. So, the fundraising is critical, the advocacy, and all kidding aside, we do like to recruit younger people. My board chair, that's one of her big things, is to try to recruit newer, younger board members.
That is great. What are your needs in terms of future board members?
Probably financial. And I'm sure it's the same with Sherry. Our agencies, we've got like so many diverse fundings. Our agency has a calendar fiscal year, but we have grants and contracts that are on 3 or 4 different fiscal years. So we need people with a financial background that when we present financial information can really understand that. We have some good people that can do that, but we can always use more.
That's great. Okay, we're going to open up a Q&A. What questions do you have for our esteemed panel?
None. Right now. It's a good opportunity. It's rare we get our peers.
Go ahead.
What are some of the things that you guys do for an orientation process? What do you think is the most invaluable thing you do for them?
Well, actually, I'm having one Thursday, and you brought up a good point. It's I have to remember that the chair should be doing this because I usually get to do it, and we have a board manual. And what we do for the new board member, and I like the idea of the social, by the way, afterwards too. I was that staff person that was dancing on the table. I thought. But I have them bring their manual, and basically I go through it. All the items, the budget, the board. We have board of directors policies, what they mean, how we're funded, and what the acronyms mean, and we have in our board book all the acronyms that we use because we can slip into that during meetings, and then we have an agency DVD that gives them a good overview of the programs and services and the eligibility. But I have to say this though, and I'm sure Sherry's probably because of you too in your funding, it probably takes our board members a good 2 years to really get a grasp on all the funding sources and how they all connect and work. But it's an overview. It's an hour and a half overview of all of that.
I know, John, you said something about you have a different view on term limits. Do you want to talk about that? Because I just...
Well, we used to have, we have a 2-year term limit for a new board member that comes on, but the officers only can serve 1 year, and then they can succeed themselves for another year. So they have only 2 years. We had the 2-year term limit, then we decided we need to change this. People were staying on forever. So we changed it, but we found that some people coming off was our biggest supporters, financially, legislatively, and we said we don't want that to happen. So we went back and changed the bylaws again, so that basically we now don't have a term limit. But your point is well taken about emeritus. We've used that structure, but you've got to have a nominating committee, in my opinion, that's got the courage to not nominate some people, to say it's time for this person to leave, you know.
And Dr. Sherry?
Well, I agree. Our organization, the bylaws are written that our board members serve 1 year terms. Now, for those that have contributed to the organization throughout the year, guess what? They are asked to serve again. But this really has worked for my organization, because if you have a non-keeper, someone that's not pulling their weight or whatever, the longest you're going to have to put up with that is 1 year. And then the members that are engaged and, you know, participate, raise monies for you, do advocacy, they're there for the historical perspective. And usually we find that board members that can no longer serve, they usually will resign, and so you don't have to have that embarrassment. But we do write letters at the our annual meeting is in November. In September, saying thank you for serving. It's the thank you for serving letter, and you know, and that means that, you know, you're done. And so it works this way. We tried the 3-year term, huh?
You're brutal.
No, I don't do it. My board does it. The nominating committee does it. And but the strong nominating committee is a must. We traditionally have had the past chair to be the chair of the nominating committee, and that has worked because they are very knowledgeable of who is working, who's not, and that works for us.
That's really good. Other questions that you might have? Because if you don't, I've got another one. Go ahead.
Mr. Clark, how did you go about setting up, or maybe was it, set up the minimum and maximum for fundraising obligations?
It came from our fund development committee, and that was one good thing about that requirement. It came from the board itself. It did not come from me suggesting it. Previously, we said you have to give something that's personally significant, just like the gentleman was saying, 25, 50. But the board committee itself felt it needed to be a minimum of $100. I mean, if you're on this board, you can, most people working can afford $100. I grant you there are some situations where maybe not, and the maximum is $1,000. And I was really worried that, and we did that about.
So they can't give any more than $1,000?
Oh, yeah, they can, of course. But that was what they had to at least get in addition to the 100.
Okay.
And we only lost maybe 2 board members because of that, of our 32 at the time. So.
If I could add something quick, and
Sure.
then Paula. A friend of ours just was interviewed for a board, I'll leave it unnamed, but in the area, and he was told in that first meeting a minimum of $5,000.
Yeah, there's a group in Tallahassee of my peers, and she said her board has a minimum. They have to give personally $10,000.
Wow.
And my comment was, do you get any board members? And she said, we never have any problems. Well, of course, Jacksonville.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say that I do agree with John that it has to be, because we didn't have that minimum give or get for a long period of time, and it came out of a strategic planning meeting for my board, and then they established it, and they were all around it. You know, it was the time to move in that direction. So I do think that it is something that they have to all be in an agreement to. And then one of the things that I do is at the board meeting I have a scorecard that's kept, and we don't, it's not verbally gone and where you say, you know, Sherry, you haven't done this, but it clearly they can see it and everybody gets it in the room, whether or not and where they're at in that give or get. the amount. And so, that bless and release, if they haven't done what they needed to do, even though you're in a term, that scorecard does give my executive committee the ability to come back to say to someone, you're not pulling your weight. And I think that maybe you need to move over to being a friend of the agencies or whatever.
I was going to say, I guess what boggles my mind is, in this day and time, who joins a nonprofit board not understanding that they've got to write a check? Who does that? I mean, just to get your name on it, you just know if I'm being asked to be on a nonprofit board, no matter what it is, I'm going to be expected to give or get money for that organization.
And I heard earlier mentioning as far as grants and monies out there in the community, that questionnaires are including, does 100% of your board give personally to your organization? And how embarrassing it would be if you had to answer no, because I think the feeling is, if your board does not believe in your organization, then why should we support you?
Exactly. I think I saw your hand up back there.
How do you define your board members plans, organization? How do you define with your board members and your clients?
Oh, yeah. That's. You mean how do they know about the clients and all?
No, I'm talking about how do you intertwine your board members?
Interact with, I can speak to that.
The board members can interact with your clients, and your board members can see the client. Because I'm a firm believer, having a board member, anybody donate them doesn't see a client. How do you do that?
My office, we've got 14 sites, United Cerebral Palsy, but my office is inside for purpose in our most critical, physically, medically complex day program. And we have our board meetings and committee meetings at that particular location on purpose. And when you walk through the building, you're going to have to interact with the clients. Now, some people, because 95% of these individuals are wheelchair users, have tube feed, it's the most critical. And some initially are a little bit taken back. But as time goes on, I have found that they want to hear a client story. In every board meeting, we give a client story, an individual story, a picture to personalize and also to solidify that this is why we're here. And it's very important. We also have a client on our board that comes to our board meetings, and that gives them a opportunity to interact. I've had board members to say, look, I give you money, but I just can't do things, and that's okay. That's okay, because everybody has their strengths and weaknesses, but we want them to be aware. And I have never found where, given time, that an individual board member hasn't been able to at least accept the fact that, who we are there to serve, and feel good about that fact.
Great. Go ahead.
I just want to ask the three panel members, do any of you actually have clients that sit on the board?
I do.
You said you do?
Yeah.
They're actually a board member voting?
Yes.
Okay. All
No.
of you?
No. For some of our programs, the only criteria is that you be 60 and over. And we've got quite a few board members over 60, but no, we don't have actually people getting Meals on Wheels.
Can I ask you what your opinion is on that?
I think it depends on the agency. I think it works for certain nonprofits. I know that the Mental Health Association in Fort Walton does have a member that was a client served, and that it's really helpful because they can give a different perspective on what it's like. And so, but it just depends. You serve children, you're not going to have a child on the board. Now, you might have a parent of a child that's gone through the program who, is passionate about their mission.
What about a volunteering program?
Oh, yeah.
We have.
Oh, yeah. Our board members, they can be we call our volunteers bigs, so they can be a big. When I first came to the agency, though, our policy was that they couldn't, and I immediately changed that. I just thought, how can you
Other questions?
make that connection?
Yes.
I want to know what your opinion on having relatives on the board.
Relatives?
No way. Got enough problems.
No.
We've got a board that we're familiar with in the area, and it's a very small board. And there are 3 family members on the board out of a total of 5 or 6 board members. And I think because it was started by one person and it's still pretty early on, it makes sense that it's 3 generations in one family, that they're all passionate about it and they give a lot, but they are consciously trying to expand that board and bring on some other board members, because I think it will balance it and build sustainability. When we visited with them, we said, you might have a sustainability issue. It's just too closely run.
Well, my reply would be to that, have you met my family?
You wouldn't want them to.
Yes.
In all honesty, really what that does, it's a potential conflict of interest.
Yeah.
And if there's a potential conflict of interest, then on the other side of the spectrum, the community, they say there's a conflict of interest. Well, it doesn't have to be a conflict of interest, but the perception can be that it's a conflict of interest. And all of your organizations want to stand up for the ethics and integrity and not having conflict of interest. You want to be transparent. And if there's a potential conflict of interest, perceptions can be out there. They don't have to be right, but they can be out there, and they're detrimental to the organization. So whenever there's a potential conflict of interest, you have to say no. And I would say having family on the board would be a potential conflict of interest.
We have time for one more question. We have no further questions. Let's thank we have one more question.
I'm sorry, Morris, but you spoke about that you had some of your services, like you had some of your clients who serve sitting on your board. Is that mandated by your funding source? I did see that in the question where funding source, I was applying for some, and they asked, do we have any of our customers serving on board? Is that mandated, or did you just decide to do it? Or?
It is not required, but this particular individual is part of one of our programs that is not like the individuals that I described in our one adult program. He's kind of a mentor among many of the other clients that are ambulatory, and so listening to him, we have suggestion boxes, and he was just always had great ideas, and so we put him on the board, and he has done a great job. It is not something that we're just doing because it sounds good. We also have a parent that his son lives in one of our group homes, and that works as well, and he never crosses that line as far as trying to have special treatment because of that. We have just a dynamite great board of directors.
Can we just give a special warm thanks to John, Sherry, and Paula for coming? Thank you very much. And I'm going to hand it over to Andrew in 1 minute, but there are some of you out there that may not be currently serving on a board, or you may be serving on a board and you want to serve on a second board. We're trying to match people that are qualified board members with boards that are in need of members. So I have a form that I'm going to have in the back. If you have any interest in filling out, it only takes a few minutes, and your service will be greatly appreciated. Please thank Joan and Steve for giving has a flash drive for you guys in the back, and Sherry, they wanted to see if they could get one of your books that you are graciously going to share with all of today's participants. Dr. White has written How to Run Any Nonprofit Without Doing the Hot Sand Boogie. So if you notice from her 2 comments about family, there will be some humor involved in this, but a lot of great techniques that she's learned over the years.
And we very much appreciate that she is willing to share that with each of you guys and has a copy for you in the back. We do need to get your couple points for you guys. We need to get your post quiz done. We'll go over that very quickly. Hopefully y'all been doing the open book test method because it's been in your binder and you may have been filling it out as we've been going along. But you need to fill those out. Other housekeeping note, one of the big questions, follow-up questions to the auditor